Good morning and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. This is our second show of 2025, and I am glad to be back into a weekly rhythm. With me today are my colleagues, Yuri Smouter, host of the 1+1 program, and Connor Exum, author and host of Leon Trotsky's Revolutionary Substack. How are you guys doing, Connor, Yuri?
You go first, Connor.
I'm doing very well. I'm looking forward to our new kleptocracy.
meet the new oligarch, same as the old oligarch.
That's right. I just don't have a shotgun to signal to.
Connor, what is with the pessimism? Are you not hearing Ron the Eclectic? Are you not hearing Electronic Intifada? Are you not hearing all of our wonderful anti-imperialist leftists who say that Trump has helped with this deal, this ceasefire? He's a peacenik. Come on, guys.
Okay, so let's talk about this because this is great. I want to get into our real topic of the definition of socialism, but this is important. This is a really complicated mess to untie before we get to basic stuff.
Yeah.
So Israel announced, and now they've walking it back, but beyond the whole Israel now walking it back, Israel announced that they were going to agree to a ceasefire with the Palestinians that was going to start on the 19th of January this year. And
Kissinger
and the Biden administration announced it in a way that made it sound like, hey, look at what we've done. We're taking credit for this. This is us. We're great.
A January surprise as opposed to October surprise.
Now this, if only they had been able to do it in October. But they wanted the media free to cover the Trump stuff in October because, that's how they were going to win all the coverage of Trump's criminal prosecutions.
Ooh.
Oh, well.
I'll just say, look, first of all, it's an honor to be invited back, and it's a real honor to be co-panelist with Connor. And let me just say, first off, Happy New Year. I had a really, really crappy Christmas, New Year's break because the day I got back from visiting my sister, her now husband, college sweetheart, and my two nephews, I got sick with bronchitis.
Oh no.
Which is a real effing bitch of a disease when you are struck by it. So was sick from December 27th up till 2 days ago. So so I'm free to again pollute my lungs by smoking cigarettes, but I am going to go to rehab for that. And it's been and
remember, folks, rehab can work if it's voluntary.
Although I say to myself, okay, when you're going on vacation, and you are literally taking a break from work, which is 1+1 and so forth, I try my best not to consume like leftish media or all of the other media, and I try my best, and I don't watch corporate media and Western state media because that just really, really boils my blood. But every now and then, you gotta check what's going on for the sake of it, and
deconstructing.
One of the reasons why I really, really am happy to be back here is you two. This space is one of the few spaces where I love the outlets I follow from Press News to Breakthrough News, but something which has been getting really, really under my skin about the left, and I'm talking about the best of the left that tends to be quite socially liberal, anti-imperialist, and wants Marxism and all that stuff. But I've been getting really, really annoyed at so many of my comrades, colleagues, people who come on my show when they keep saying the following: Donald Trump is a peacenik. He's not as bad as people make him out to be. He's, I get it. Democrats suck, blah, 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 blah. They're also genocidaires and so forth. But that does not mean that you have to minimize how awful Donald Trump is, how awful he's going to be with this huge political comeback of his, and again, like, it's a real honor to be here because both of you and Chris, with what you do weekly every Sunday, it's one of the few places where, like, you do go all due respect, comrades, but that's some serious bullshit about Donald Trump.
No, I will say,
Donald Trump is going to, like, butt heads with, like, the deep state and blah 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 blah.
One, Donald Trump is not a peacenik.
Exactly.
2, Donald Trump is only going to butt heads with the deep state when he can't control it himself.
Yeah.
3, Donald Trump is fundamentally a guy who wants to be an authoritarian dictator, and he's not interested in doing good for anyone but himself and his immediate family. So it really, there's no good thing that one can say about Donald Trump being president, except that Donald Trump being president drives specific contradictions and conflicts among the ruling class that ultimately can only benefit the people.
Well, and also it's important to realize, because let's actually go through why Donald Trump is not a peacenik. Okay, just because, and I do agree with Trump. Let's stop this clusterfuck in Ukraine. Let's de-escalate. Let's actually have détente with Russia, even though the side effects of that is that the far right of Russia and the far right of the West are probably going to coalesce more or less, even though Putin's foreign policy is a bit wrong Polish.
But
that being said, Donald Trump has explicitly ran on the following: ripping up the Iran nuclear deal and wanting to actually go to war with Iran.
Pretty much, yes.
Using Russia to drive a wedge between BRICS, so that, and trying to bribe Russia to join the pivot to Asia to actually have a possible hot war or simply endless cold wars with the Chinese.
Well, yeah.
And of course, Donald Trump wants to continue to sanction the hell out of North Korea. Whatever you think of North Korea, and I guarantee you, a quarter of what you think takes place in North Korea actually comes from Korean defectors who simply lie in order so that they get their immigration.
Let's remember
on Israel alone, Donald Trump is as ultra Zionist as the left.
Let's remember that it's South Korea that just had a constitutional crisis because its president wanted to make himself dictator after losing an election.
And not the first time that the South Korean right does something like this.
Hey, let's face it. South Korea exists because Truman, on Eisenhower's advice, trusted a guy who had kind of been in bed with the Japanese early in World War II.
Yep.
As the most respected anti-communist Korean nationalist, and that ended up
scratch a South Korean liberal and a fascist, bleeds or comes out.
So let's talk. This is our segue. So liberalism. What do we mean by liberalism? Liberalism. Well, and that's where it starts. Yeah, liberalism represents a strain of political thought that originates in the late 17th century to justify a bourgeois, middle-class, mercantile oligarchy usurping more of the privileges of the aristocracy, while the aristocracy usurped more of the privileges of the monarchy in the name of Republican freedom.
Spot on. No, that's exactly spot on. In fact, I probably told you this story the first time you invited me on your show, I remember describing myself as a liberal because liberals was everything that Republicans, conservative from whatever country often denigrate and so forth. So I considered myself a liberal, and they were very much like in favor of like economic control, trying to redistribute the wealth, blah blah blah, blah and so forth. I go to my IB history teacher's class. It's the end of his comparative governments class, and he explains what a liberal democracy is. And one of the tenets of a liberal democracy was the free market, to which I understand capitalism, and isn't that what like only right-wingers want? So I asked my teacher, Mr. Binns, like, wait a minute, a liberal democracy, you have to have a free market? Isn't that what a conservative democracy is? He looks at me very like, and he goes, Yuri, there's never been such thing as a conservative democracy. We've only had liberal democracies, and part of a liberal democracy is the free market. It was right then and there I realized not only am I a socialist, not only am I a flaming leftist of all kind, but I am definitely a Marxist.
Well, the first liberals, in the sense of the word, are John Locke and Adam Smith.
Yeah.
John Locke is a wonderful mess of contradictions. He talks a lot about freedom. He talks a lot about republicanism. He talks a lot about the guaranteed equal rights of all human beings. And then he also focuses on this right to private property that undercuts everything else. And this is something that I don't think most people who think of John Locke as a political philosopher really are aware of. But John Locke, in his professional life, was appointed by William III of England, the Dutchman who became King of England, as one of the commissioners of the Bank of England. What's more, the president of the Dutch Republic who became King of England. Now there's a contradiction for you.
Well, republic was a very loose term.
So, well, that's the whole funny thing.
Back then, I mean, even Madison.
The cities of Amsterdam and Rotterdam and all of the other cities of what's now the Netherlands had tremendously well-developed systems of representative democracy and extremely constitutionally rigorous, but at the same time they had a military dictatorship and a hereditary president.
Yeah,
well,
but
and not only that, also the Catholic Church, rightly so though, has a reputation of being the root of all evil when it comes to people who say all religions suck and we gotta get rid of all, like if we just got rid of Christianity, blah 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 and all that stuff. But actually, the Catholic Church actually does have like a lot of like teachings of like social justice. It's actually the Protestants that are actually much more reactionary, and the Dutch really did believe in Protestant ethic, and they actually had the most rapid fire and brimstone of Protestantism, which is Calvinism.
The reason that
why the Flemish did not want to be part of the Netherlands and got into this bizarre arranged marriage with Francophone Catholics. And
the Flemish, don't get me started on the Flemish, because the revolt against the Spanish started in Brussels and Antwerp. And somewhere along the line, the Flemish were like, we're not so sure about this. After starting the whole thing themselves. The people we think of as the Dutch now were dragged along by the Flemings who don't want to be part of the Dutch Republic and who ended up chickening out and siding with the Spanish as soon as the Spanish made some concessions.
And they're both constitutional monarchs in the end. Actually, most of Europe.
This is my favorite. This is my favorite bit of history. This is my favorite bit of history. So, number one, President Your Majesty was able to set himself up as the military dictator of the United Netherlands, primarily because of a religious dispute. The Calvinists dragged the Arminians out of the Royal Dutch Hall in Amsterdam. It wasn't the Royal Dutch Hall then. It was, democracy. But the Calvinists dragged the Arminians out of what's now the Royal Dutch Hall in Amsterdam and killed them in the streets. And because the Arminians also happened to be the leaders of the democracy movement in the cities, that meant there was no political opposition to William III becoming the military dictator of the United Netherlands anymore.
Poor Arminians. Arminians have always gone such a fucking rotten deal, like in history. And that includes, not to be an anti-communist leftist, but that also includes when they were under the boot of the USSR.
No, not Armenians. Not Armenians. Arminians. It's a Christian thing. The Arminians are the Calvinists who said Calvin was wrong about predestination. They didn't want to actually criticize Calvin, and so they couldn't say predestination is shit. So instead, they came up with this elaborate argument of why predestination was not absolute and everyone could still be saved.
Catholic Church is all about confessing your sins, and if you do like the right things, you will still go to heaven. Whereas Protestants believe in personal responsibility. You don't confess. You don't. There ain't no confession. You just gotta be a very, very, very good Christian. You gotta walk on eggshells and so forth. And if you sin, well, hey, tough shit. There's a chance that you just may not get to heaven. And you definitely probably won't get into purgatory either. It's a great way of keeping the people in line. And Martin Luther, for all of his supposed liberalism that I was taught when I was in the 5th grade, was a raging, and I mean raging anti-Semite asshole.
So Martin Luther's problem was essentially that the Catholic Church was not taking forgiveness seriously enough and were making it a commodity instead of something that sinners had to earn. And Luther's complaint was the Catholic Church selling indulgences.
Look at how ahead of the times they were. They should have made that a meme coin, and they would have been golden. Put a little blockchain on that.
Just imagine if Pope Francis were like one of the old-fashioned popes from the Renaissance. This would be like the golden age of the corrupt secular papacy.
Blockchain would be his friend.
It's funny if you talk to any secular Catholic, which I know is a bit of a contradiction, or a liberal Catholic, you ask them like who their favorite pope is, and none of them really have a good thing to say about any of the popes, except for the one that did Vatican II and the current pope right now. I can say a couple of good things about John Paul I, who died very quickly, and so you can't really say any bad things about him.
Wasn't that his best feature? Is that he died before he could
died
do
so fast that no one
days?
can complain about him. Therefore, he's the most popular pope ever. Yes.
Well, if you watch Godfather Part 3, they kind of
So the Godfather Part 3
that he died because he wanted to stop all the fucking dodgy shit that the Vatican Bank.
This is also
were involved.
This was the real conspiracy theory, and the reason Godfather 3 is built around a Vatican bank scandal is because there was a real conspiracy theory at the time that John Paul I had been murdered to cover up the Vatican bank scandal that was unfolding in real time.
Well, there was that guy that died from the bank scandal. He was found underneath an English bridge, stabbed.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, in 1985.
So the real fact is,
he was the dodgy bankster.
The real
could have answered a lot of questions, but
the real historical fact. For those who've seen The Godfather Part 3 and know that story, or who have heard the conspiracy theory about John Paul I. But first, let's get to the conspiracy theory so that people understand it, because John Paul
hypothesis.
Before most people, yes, conspiracy hypothesis, good point. So John Paul I really was, at least publicly, talking about investigating the Vatican bank scandal and appointing a papal legate specifically for the purpose of cleaning that shit up. And then he died.
Yeah, well.
And the conspiracy hypothesis was the mafia killed him to cover up their control or at least significant share in the Vatican bank. And the mafia's control of, or at least significant influence in the Catholic Church was a really big deal that needed to be dealt with.
It was, but there was no doubt that the Sicilians mafia was using the Catholic bank to launder.
The Catholic bank was openly into money laundering for everyone and anyone, including, ironically,
Muslim
extremists, communist front organizations funded by the USSR that the Catholic Church was supposed to be against, all sorts of interesting clients, none of whom most popes would be allowed to approve of.
They know the PLO was funneling money through there.
But you know what's funny? But you know what's really funny about all of that is, if you remember in the 90s when everybody completely lost their shit when Sinead O'Connor called out the Vatican for
John Paul II specifically,
and famously ripped up a picture of Pope John Paul II. The reason why many people really, really hated The Godfather Part 3 was because, how dare you? Yes, the Vatican Church may be socially regressive. Yes, it's not always perfect. But how dare you say they would ever get in bed with the mafia? Fascists, yes. Mafia, that's their limits.
But that's hilarious because that's...
What are you guys talking about? Frontline documentaries on this shit.
The cardinal who was in charge of the Vatican bank had a heart attack. And John Paul I had a heart attack.
Did they?
Well, John Paul I had a heart condition that is factually attested to, and which he was aware of and he kept secret from other people when he was appointed pope. So, I mean, most likely he really did have a heart attack.
Sure, due to potassium.
The minimum age for even like becoming a pope or a priest is like, late 50s, late 60s, early 70s, maybe the 80s.
It really depends. On average, popes tend to be old. There have been some shockingly young popes.
There's a guy from my town who's pretty big in the Catholic Church. He's a papal nuncio, and he's about 52. So I mean, he could theoretically become a pope if he could get the votes in the next.
And by the way, I hate to do this because I am a feminist and I try my best to be an ally to the feminist movement, especially the Marxist feminists. But for all of the feminists and people who, men like myself who also hate men, who say that, if you just had more women priests and if you just had the nuns like control, let me just say, talk to any victim of the residential schools.
That's all nuns. That's all on the nuns.
Talk to any Irish woman who was a fallen woman in those Magdalene scandals, and they'll say the nuns were just as brutal and just as big dicks as priests.
Obviously, this is a very different sort of thing and much less serious. But I mean, if you want to hear stories about nuns, ask any American who went to Catholic school.
I went later than that, but I went to Catholic school. We had nuns. They were a little annoying, but not that bad. But I mean, also it's the 90s, so
that makes
although I still think the brother tried to get me electrocuted once, but that's a different story.
But even George Carlin, the most well-known atheist, outspoken leftist stand-up comedian, but even he said in interviews on Inside the Actors Studio, and when he was celebrating 40 years of comedy, and he was interviewed by young Jon Stewart, he did say that he preferred the nuns than the priests. So
I don't know. You know, I mean, there was it was definitely a hotbed of problems across the board with that. I mean, you get
in the golden age of Catholic schooling from the 30s to the 70s. It was the nuns who dealt out the physical violence in the classroom. Let's put it that way.
But that being said, and we do have to give the left-ish factions of the Catholic Church credit where credit is due. Liberation theology was wonderful. Those Catholics that were part of the anti-Vietnam War movement and were part of many progressive left movements of
the liberation Catholics, they got
slaughtered in Nicaragua. Let's remember that Catholic
Aristide of Haiti, Viva Aristide, was a liberation theologist and was aided by Vatican.
But let's remember that there is a strong slice of anti-clericalism that goes with that liberation theology in every Catholic country too.
Mm-hmm.
But
there is a reason. There is a reason that the Spanish anarchists were killing priests and nuns during the Spanish Civil War, and it was not because they were trying to stamp out Catholicism because they didn't want people to believe in God. It was because the priests and the nuns owned massive amounts of land and were basically killing peasants.
But not only that, very recently, the Church of England is also going through its own
sex
scandals, and I think
the Archbishop of Canterbury resigned last year.
Yeah, exactly, and Lord knows what kind of systemic corporal punishment, child abuse, sexual abuse goes on with the fucking Christian evangelical. The right-wingers, the openly fascistic right-wingers and so forth.
Certainly. All that
we can get along with.
I mean, it doesn't matter. You give anybody, male or female, religious authority and a ruler in a classroom and they turn into a nun real fast.
Exactly, yeah. But
back to our topic of liberalism and socialism.
No. I was going to ask the $1 million question because liberalism is associated with lots of positivities. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Canadians continuously vote, whether they like them or not, for the Liberal Party of Canada. If not for the Liberal Party of England, I can tell you England would have been a one-party state, and it still would have been a backward-ass place. So we do have to give liberals credit where credit is.
Well, so
liberals are the original One Nation Tories, compassionate conservatives.
Well, the original One Nation Tories were the Disraeli conservatives who said we need to uplift the poor and supported Charles Dickens' sort of social Christianity programs because the British liberals of the Victorian era were pro-killing people in factories.
Well,
interesting.
Disraeli was the original One Nation Tory. He was the original One Nation conservative saying we need to be British first. Remember, Disraeli's father was Jewish, and Disraeli converted to Christianity only when he was made an earl.
Yeah, well, you don't know.
You didn't know Disraeli was Jewish?
You don't know.
That's why his name was Disraeli.
But Chris, they keep that shit secret. And let me give you an idea of how much censorship and suppression goes on in the British school system. I went to England.
I just want to say, when we talk about British anti-Semitism, the perfect example is the first conservative prime minister of Great Britain's name was Disraeli, because when his grandfather came to England, all the people who knew him referred to him as Isaac the Jew. So he became Isaac Disraeli.
Wow.
And so that's where the family name comes from, the basic anti-Semitism of his friends and neighbors.
But let me tell you this brilliant story, Connor. You're gonna love this. So I went to London to visit friends of mine who are there. Many of them who are involved in the left movement there. And after this meeting of Socialist Workers' Party, we went to this one local pub in Islington, and I was listening to a conversation two of the more younger people were having about the Black Lives Matter protests in England and hearing about institutional racism in Britain and so forth. So I asked them, what did your schools did your schools teach you anything about the Black civil rights movements in England and so forth? And they said no. And I said to them, well, did your schools ever teach you about British colonialism in Jamaica, Trinidad and so forth? And then they said no. And I was like, wait a minute, did your schools ever teach you about settler colonialism in Ireland, Australia, New Zealand, the United States? And they kept saying no. And I was like, how could your schools have not teach you this? And they said, no, you got to understand, this is how the education system works in England. We learn about the boring Middle Ages. We learn about the early monarch system. We learn about Henry VIII and so forth. And then we skip every single thing that ever happened in history
until World War II.
Because we look good in that war, because we won the war against Nazism, and then we're completely historically illiterate unless we go to university, and then we get some idea of British history. And
there's really nothing about what happened after World War II either. And
so
how
do they start up again around Margaret Thatcher?
Yeah.
Tony Blair, because remember, Margaret Thatcher's still the bad guy, and Tony Blair's the good guy, but Tony Blair is Margaret Thatcher.
But I just figured that, she beat the punks down, and she put those soccer riots in their place. So, that's kind of a victory. Nobody likes
but Callahan broke the general strike.
Okay, here's something even interesting about Margaret Thatcher. As Chris was
explaining, and no one
puked
on her.
But as Chris was explaining about One Nation Tories, these, there actually were but this is why single-payer health care was allowed to pass. Some kind of a welfare state, however stingy it was,
Clement Attlee
was allowed to pass. Margaret Thatcher was considered very radical, even for right-wing assholes in the Tory party. And when she was elected, she fucking purged that party of what she called Wets or something like that. So,
your Anthony Eden type old school, we support the PLO conservatives hated Margaret Thatcher. Because remember, when Margaret Thatcher, let's remember a few years before Margaret Thatcher became leader of the Conservative Party, the Conservative Party was the pro-Arab party in the UK that supported various opposition positions to Israel.
But Thatcher and Thatcherite Tories were considered so radical that Queen Elizabeth herself and the rabid godfather of British xenophobia,
Philip.
Oh fuck! I'm blanking on his name. The guy who threw the rivers of
Mountbatten, Enoch Powell.
Even Enoch Powell thought Margaret Thatcher's economic policy was dude, I hate poor people too, but I don't want to see them fucking.
Well, Enoch Powell. Enoch Powell seemed to actually have some sort of small compassion for British poor people. It's just he thought most of the poor people were immigrants, and that was the real problem.
Even though it was his idea to even bring them over from Jamaica, Nigeria, they should have been in their homes actually building up their own welfare state, but Britain basically stole them, lied to them that they were going to get great jobs, that England is this wonderful place that you read about in your boring books that Jane Austen does. And when most of those immigrants, whether they were from Uganda, whether they were from Jamaica, whether they were even from the Middle East, South Asia, were all very disappointed when they came to England.
But Governor, the White City isn't anything like East Flycatch.
Basically. And then they never got those high-paying jobs. They actually were all, like, demoted to just, like, cheap labor.
And then the Windrush scandal comes along and a bunch of their kids are deported back to Jamaica despite being citizens.
Well, that's going to happen after January 25th.
You can't make this. You can't make this shit.
Well,
up.
and so back to liberalism and what liberalism means.
Isn't the internet popping with all the deportation of people in Chicago back to their homelands, even if Chicago might be your homeland?
I mean, let's be honest. If you go by the numbers, the homeland of most of the people of Chicago is Poland.
Hey, good sausage.
I'm just saying.
And arguably, and this is going to piss off Russians, but arguably,
better borscht.
Apparently, it was the Poles that created vodka, and I can
the
tell
Poles invented vodka.
Polish vodka is
so no, but here's the thing: in Russia, Russian vodka, which is there's such a premium, mostly for Cold War reasons more than anything else. It was hard to get Russian vodka because of the Cold War.
Yeah,
Russian vodka is considered premium in the West. But in Russia, Polish vodka is considered premium. So you're not insulting the Russians. The Russians, the rich Russians buy expensive Polish vodka. There's a specific kind of Polish vodka called Starka, which is brown instead of clear and looks like Jack but tastes like vodka. It's totally freaky if you've never had it before. That's what Russians with money drink, is this Starka, which is brown Polish vodka that looks like Jack.
Yeah. But going back to liberalism, it's funny because lots of self-described liberals and those who believe in a liberal democracy.
Ebenezer Scrooge believed in a liberal democracy. I want to be clear about that.
Well, that's the thing. Like, a lot of people who call themselves liberals are part of, like, Christian Democrat parties, which are center-right parties. In theory and on paper, the Social Democratic parties, which were supposed to be the parties of the workers and the unions, were supposed to push back against that. And then in the U.S., because of the Red Scare, because of McCarthyism, and because of socialism being such a dirty word, because it's associated with the USSR and so forth, you have what you call the liberal left, or people who actually are socialists. They call themselves liberals in order to
the only countries during the Cold War whose social democratic parties were against the Cold War and friendly to the USSR were Germany, with the Social Democrats under Willy Brown, and Sweden. But in Sweden, their Social Democrat prime minister, who wanted to more openly align with the Soviet bloc, was assassinated by his country's military-industrial complex under circumstances that may have had CIA involvement.
Oh, and also Israel and also South Africa. But that's interesting because if you read...
We all know the NSA took that one. They were tired of the CIA.
As a fun fact.
No, but Connor and Chris, it's quite fascinating. In fact, I'm even gonna try to do a show about this. So if you look at the Socialist International, these are all of, like, this is where all of the social democratic parties and parties that want their country to be more socialistic. Once upon a time, the NDP. They
kind of lost credibility with me in the early 90s when they let what's his name, Hosni Mubarak's party in Egypt was admitted to the Socialist International while he was dictator.
No, but that's the thing. Like the Socialist International and the Democratic Socialist Party of the U.S. was allowed to be like an observer, a member, but these same social democratic parties, I can tell you, not much difference between their opponents, like the Gaullist parties in France, Christian democratic parties in Germany, Christian democratic parties in Belgium. Olof Palme broke, it was considered heretical when he actually said, why doesn't the Socialist International and why don't us Social Democrats actually have détentes with the USSR, with Cuba and so forth, and we really have a broad church of the left to really smash capitalism and whatnot.
There was this really scary moment in the 60s where Willie Brown became Chancellor of Germany. And his whole platform was Ostpolitik, which was rapprochement with East Germany in the hopes of becoming more socialist and reunifying on a we're joining the socialists basis. And he was defeated. They didn't have to assassinate him. He wasn't able to stay in power super long, but that was a scary moment because, that was an actual social democratic movement in the most important anti-communist ally in the bloc, West Germany.
And not only that, but like Willy Brandt actually visited East Germany and recognized their borders, actually recognized the USSR and their borders, actually went the very first head of state in post-World War II Germany to visit Poland, visit the sites of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and he felt so ashamed that he literally just kneeled down and basically was saying, forgive me and my country for what we did to you, as he laid down a wreath and so forth. And then they basically ousted him in a scandal where apparently an East German spy was part of his cabinet. And then they did the same to Gough Whitlam. This is what's also interesting. The Labour Party the Labour Party of Australia is still actually a member of Socialist International, even though they are very much a neoliberal center-right party. And when Gough Whitlam pulled troops out of Vietnam, pardoned all of the anti-war protesters and whatnot, and had their records
Lord Wilson
expunged. Had détente, was the first country to actually recognize China. And
do you mean Lord Wilson?
No. Gough Whitlam of Australia.
Gough Whitlam of Australia. I got you. I'm sorry. I'm confused. That's my fault. I was still thinking England. I apologize.
But actually, the Labour Party of England, which on paper was supposed to be a democratic socialist party, but actually governs always like a right-wing party. Once upon a time, they were members of Socialist International.
Well, yeah, they under Tony Blair even still.
Which is great, Steve.
Yeah, no, but the reason I was thinking Lord Wilson is Lord Wilson famously refused to go into Vietnam with LBJ, and was later accused of having Russian spies in MI5 and MI6.
But here's the
it was a commie mistress. You know it.
But here's the funny thing. Harold Wilson also was a flaming imperialist, very much pro-nuclear weapons, did not aggressively go after tax evaders and stuff like that, and tried to put a lid on how much power the Tony Benns of the world had. And recently declassified documents, which Mark Curtis has talked about in his book about how England is, how the British Empire never really ended. Yeah, England was definitely
and yet the right wing of the British National Security State still swears by every word in that awful book Spycatcher and thinks Lord Wilson was a KGB agent.
Exactly. But a little too much independence, and the American Empire is going to rain a shitstorm down your throat, which was why Kennedy helped oust John Diefenbaker of the Progressive Conservatives to put Lester Pearson, because he wanted nuclear weapons in Canada. It's why
John Diefenbaker
was also ousted in a constitutional coup, and then the Labour Party under Bob Hawke became
let's
liberal before Tony Blair even was there. And on it goes.
And John Diefenbaker is yet another one of these Benjamin Disraeli type one nation Tories who's trying to actually be liberal in the classical liberal sense.
What?
Like
Dave Rubin?
like Eisenhower.
Coin that phrase?
Like Eisenhower.
Like Eisenhower taxed rich fucks in the 90s.
Yeah, no, I mean, John,
and even Bernie Sanders says, "Oh no, I'm not like my my communist friend or my socialist friend Dwight Eisenhower."
Yeah, no, he said, "I'm only going to charge. I'm only going to tax him 50% or something like that." Yeah, but no, but this whole, I mean, back to this whole Ebenezer Scrooge was would have voted liberal. The heroes of A Christmas Carol are the two missionaries. And I say missionaries because that's what they would have been in that time. That's who would have been collecting money for the poor, is the people who were at the time the British equivalent of the Salvation Army.
Well, I mean, the Salvation Army is only like 30 years away from that.
Yeah, the real Salvation Army in the U.S. is 30 years away from that. The Christian Reform movement, which was very much the people Dickens was writing to represent. The Christian Reform movement were a faction of the Church of England who believed that the liberal welfare state, which admittedly gave something for poor people that hadn't been there before, was cruel and dehumanizing and brutal, and that the Church of England needed to openly support programs to end poverty. The Christian Reform movement was something Dickens was very much into. That's why, the heroes of the Christmas Carol are those people collecting for the poor who say to Dickens, "Can you spare anything for those who might not be able to have some holiday cheer this season?" And Dickens is, well, I pay my taxes, and the welfare state's supposed to take care of those people. And he's like, "Well, some can't go and some would rather die." And then Scrooge is, then if they'd rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. That was liberalism. That was the liberalism of the Victorian era. The idea was that, so the first thing to remember is that the British liberals were utilitarians.
Yeah.
Now, what does utilitarianism mean? Utilitarianism builds on the basic premise of classical Epicureanism without the egalitarianism of classical Epicureanism. The classical Epicureanism says that all people are equal, that in a circle of friends, every friend has equal value to every other friend, and it is the community of friends that matters. Whereas in utilitarianism, it's more, well, some people are better than others. And what really matters is the best people, though they don't come out and say it. What they say instead is, like classical Epicureanism, they say, happiness is the good. There is no higher purpose than being happy. There's no meaning. There's no deeper whatever. People feel good. Everybody feeling good as much as possible is the good. But then they say we can't make everybody happy. That's impossible. Which is
it's interesting what you say, because that reminds me of what Howard Zinn in the documentary Psy Wars. Howard Zinn says the following: private charities and even government charities are there to give people a little bit of relief. But if it maintains the system, that's the purpose, to maintain the system and give people just enough that they don't break out into open rebellion.
So when we're talking about liberalism, it's a good idea to talk about the way the British economy was changing at the time. They had gone from an agrarian feudal economy in the most of the country, and urban mercantilism in London and a few select favored ship ports that did lots of business with London, to a industrialized urban economy all over the country. And they had done this very rapidly with the breakdown of the system of common lands owned by aristocratic landlords that had fed people. Because under the rural agrarian economy, you paid your landlord a percentage of your produce or a tax equal to that percentage, and you got to keep everything else. And you gave a certain amount of labor every year to your landlord, but most of the time you were your own boss. And that changed radically as landlords privatized and enclosed their holdings in order to extract more wealth from them, whether they were aristocrats or not. And in other cases, aristocrats sold their land to industrialist capitalists and only kept the right to collect rents while giving the capitalist, in essence, every other facet of ownership of the land. So you had this very complicated change, which left lots of the urban working class without subsistence because they had worked for themselves before to keep themselves fed, and a percentage of their produce went to the boss and got sold to feed everybody else. And this changed. They had to get jobs. They were forced into cities. The industrial economy of cities was brutal. And so for the first time in England, you had disabled people and poor people with no other means of support. The Liberal Party's answer was the welfare state in its first form, which is expressed in Dickens' language as the treadmill and the Poor Act. The term treadmill is important.
Wait. So, Chris, so it was the liberals that actually came up with what's notorious called like the poor laws,
the workhouse,
like the Keynesian and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like welfare to work.
The two great,
welfare, but you have to go to such and such a place, and you will get paid like $5 or something like that. That's
yes.
The
and
poorhouses, people people actually had to work.
They had to work, and more importantly, they had to do useless bullshit work for no other purpose than to make them tired, because it was their work and their suffering and their labor and their need to earn their welfare payments that made this all moral, because it was a moral hazard to give people things for free, because then they would feel entitled to those things and would demand them from the wealthy. So you see, the police state protects the welfare state protects the wealthy from the poor, and it goes hand in hand with the police state, which is why the phrase, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" in Scrooge's mouth. The liberals had created the modern penal system.
Wow, okay, interesting.
And they had specifically legislated in such a way that merely being poor was a crime.
Yeah.
So if you were poor and not in a workhouse and not employed, you were breaking the law and were liable to arrest and incarceration just for not having a job or being in a workhouse.
And at some point, the workhouses were so overpopulated, even the prisons of very petty crime, like somebody simply stealing like a loaf of bread because they were starving, or an apple.
So that was the thing.
You would be sent to a penal colony in either Australia or New Zealand, the way they
Most
brought
of-
these white the way they brought these white working class men and women and children.
Well, let's remember.
You can compare that to the way black Africans
Let's
were
remember
kidnapped
too.
from Africa and sent to.
Let's remember too that
West,
penal deportation. Well, it did happen in extreme circumstances in the English imperial court too. Penal deportation was primarily a means of colonial control in Ireland.
Yeah.
Which is why the majority of Australians have Irish-sounding last names, and why the stereotypical outback Australian accent sounds so Irish. It's why the best-known comedian from Australia's last name is Hogan. And crocodile and they also had penal colonial administrations in Scotland, which is why his most famous character was Crocodile Dundee.
But that's fascinating, because once again you're saying that it was the Liberal Party of England, of Great Britain and Ireland, that started the poorhouses and whatnot.
The poorhouses, the modern police state of England in its penal sense. The cops, of course, were created by the Tories under Robert Peel.
That's why
But the prison system was created by the Liberals according to the vision of the great so-called radical Jeremiah Bentham.
But you see, that's fascinating in and of itself, because if you go to Manchester, if you go to Manchester, go to the People's Museum, which is basically a left-wing museum, which goes into all of that. But here's the interesting thing: if you learn about the Victorian England and so forth, they make it very clear that it was a Tory idea, not a liberal idea, and they still kind of, lionize the Labour Party and the movements that support the Labour Party.
So and that's the thing, is the Labour Party ultimately, when it was originally formed, was not formed to oppose the Tories. The Labour Party was formed to oppose the Liberal Party.
But that's where the NDP comes from, and that's where any modern socialist party is basically there, because they are calling out the severe limitations of liberalism and the Liberal Party and these compassionate conservatives.
Well, one of the first socialist works, not quite socialism, Proudhon was a mutualist, which is a little more libertarian, a little less anarchist when you really come down to it. But still, Proudhon said that the central contradiction of the third French Republic, I can't keep the French Republic straight. They had so many backslides into monarchy.
Lots of upheaval, that French Revolution. It's like the Bible. It's not one book.
But that in the Third French Republic, he was very, very upset. He said, the first thing they made one of their central liberal human rights the right to your property, which all of a sudden gives the rich a huge advantage over everybody else in society.
Might explain that old Paris Commune thing.
Well, and he was also pointed out that, he also pointed out some stuff about that too.
I thought he was dead by then.
That's true. He was. The Paris Commune was Bakunin. Bakunin was actually one of the great ironies of the Bakunin versus Marx bullshit is Marx was writing, trying to encourage people to do stuff based on what he thought, whereas Bakunin was actually out doing shit himself.
Yeah.
So how do you assess Tolstoy, who, in a nutshell, was a Christian leftist anarchist, and then France, which always produces leaders who basically actually are compassionate conservatives, like Charles de Gaulle, Jacques Chirac.
Now we're going to get into Bonapartism. Now we're going to get into Bonapartism. Bonapartism is Bonapartism is the French answer to constitutional monarchy.
Exactly.
Bonapartism is the idea that we're going to get rid of the monarchy, but we want an imperial leader who can be just like a king when it really gets down to it.
Well, didn't work so well for the third.
Well, Connor, as a Marxist, Leninist, and as a Trotskyist, is it safe to?
So you're coming to a false conclusion based on his name. It's a clever scam.
It is.
Wait. But is it safe? But some people, Marxists who study the French Revolution, all claim that they all consider Napoleon to be Vladimir Lenin before there was a Vladimir Lenin.
It depends. I mean, Bonapartism is an actual term in Marxist-Leninism, and Marxist-Leninists don't approve of Bonapartism. And the conservative faction of the Brezhnev government that wanted to sort of lean off revolution in the Americas referred to Castro as a Bonapartist.
But this is also fascinating because wait, I just lost my train of thought. But I find it very fascinating that Jacobin magazine calls themselves Jacobin after.
Don't get me started on Jacobin magazine.
I will say this: call themselves Jacobins after the very radicals who launched the Reign of Terror and their idea of liberating.
But who were? But is it really that? Is it really that inappropriate? Let's remember, while Marx was very approving of the French Revolution because of the way he thought history worked, Marx also said that the French Revolution was a bourgeois revolution. So when Jacobin calls themselves Jacobin, they're telling on themselves.
Now they are.
Because the Jacobins were from the bourgeois class of French society.
I mean, the entire...
Robespierre was a PMC lawyer, professional managerial class.
Fascinating.
No, he was. I mean, all of them were at the big. What was that? They called it that. They had that big council in the tennis court.
The Declaration of the Rights of Man was what came out of it. I can't remember the name of the big.
And only men, and emphasis. Only men, even though women were actually the first protesters.
It was 1,000 people.
And even though Charlotte Corday, who assassinated Marat, was one of the leaders of the moderate to reactionary Girondin party that wanted to make accommodations with the royalists, and who were against the reign of terror. We're killing too many people instead of the point that ultimately got the Jacobins thrown out, which is we're killing the wrong people now. Because what actually got the Jacobins thrown out was when they started cutting off the head of every general who thought he might have political ambitions of his own.
So then, so if you're a conservative back then, the kind of Edmund Burke type of conservative or whatever did exist in France or in Russia before.
Well, you're a physiocrat, most likely.
But or even in post-Tsarist Russia before the Bolsheviks took over, do they only hate liberalism and they're considered reactionary because they because they're the old rich and they do not want the nouveau rich to have power. They do not want the elimination of the aristocracy and the monarchy. They want to keep things as they are. They're willing to accommodate the rising bourgeoisie and the middle class.
So let's talk about Burke.
But still, the working class has to stay in their place, and even and we can't have too much of a middle class because eventually they will displace them as
let's talk about Burke. Because Burke is very famous as the champion of conservatism in his condemnation of the French Revolution. However, more apropos to our topic, Burke was a champion of liberalism for his support of the American Revolution. And he and his political mentor, Charles James Fox, frequently attended parliament meetings wearing the uniforms of the Continental Army.
Fascinating.
Haven't we seen that lately in our Congress?
Now, there is an irony in this, in a sense, if you think about when American Congress people wear the uniform of the colonial Israeli army in the U.S. Congress. There is a parallel there. It is true.
And by the way,
It is that Burke the conservative understood that the American Revolution was a true liberal revolution of the bourgeois against the aristocracy and the monarchy in an attempt to displace them and take a piece of their power rather than to completely overthrow the established order. Burke's opposition to the French Revolution was that the bourgeois revolution lost control and sank into the liquidation of the aristocratic class, which was the thing that Karl Marx liked about it.
But funny enough, and by the way, for our audience, let me just talk to the audience.
And this is the difference, by the way, between liberalism and socialism that we're finally getting to. Karl Marx, for reasons of what I would call historical material progressivism that we can disagree with or agree with as we prefer, believed that the reason the French Revolution was ultimately a good thing was because they so greatly wiped out the French aristocracy. They didn't completely finish the job, but they so completely wiped out the French aristocracy that thereafter French conservatives were dependent on bourgeois support, and French monarchists were dependent on the support of conservative Republicans.
And let me just say, even though I hate the French Empire with every fiber of my body, especially because I solidarity to the people of Haiti, but that being said, it would have been fantastic if Napoleon had won Waterloo, if Napoleon had ousted the Tsarist Russia.
I don't know.
So Napoleon is complicated because Napoleon is what Trotsky, if you're a Trotskyist, which there isn't a Trotskyist in this conversation. Connor is an anarcho-syndicalist in disguise.
I just like Leon Trotsky.
He just likes Trotsky, and who wouldn't? Because Trotsky's cool. But that's another topic.
I'll tell you about that.
I'm not a huge fan of a lot of his big fans, but that's a whole other topic for this.
Well, that's and that's the thing.
And we're going to piss off way too many people.
I will say two things at the same time. Ultimately, a great deal of the otherwise extraordinary Socialist Equality Party's positions on cultural issues are backward and reactionary because they, while really, really expressing the spirit of socialist equality extremely well, they get really caught up in trying to appeal to the settler class, or to the colonial class when we're talking about the UK and Australia. Though in Australia, it comes back to the settler class again.
Well, actually, which is why the two times I've interviewed Nick Beams of the Socialist Equality Party of Australia, when asking him about settler colonialism and
I am very friendly. I am very friendly with Joe Kishore of the American SEP. I think he's the national secretary. I've had him on the show quite a few times.
I'm also very friendly with both Thomas Peters and John Braddock of the Socialist Equality Group in New Zealand. I've interviewed Chris Marsden of the English Great Britain branch, and but the World Socialist website does a lot of good work. But there's other times where I get like
if anything on Harvey Weinstein in the U.S. makes my eardrums explode.
Oh, come on.
Anything on treating Roman Polanski like an oppressed worker makes my eardrums explode. But that aside, nobody's perfect. Lenin covered up for predators in the Bolshevik circle.
Sure he did.
Oh, did he?
Oh, yes, there is a very famous. I wish I could remember the name to blame the specific guy, but one of the guys in the Bolshevik inner circle. I mean, one of the old Bolsheviks that Stalin later killed off. Someone who's considered, a respectable paragon of the party in any Marxist-Leninist, and not badly treated in any sort of Trotskyist or Bolshevik-Leninist history of the revolution, was a creep who had a hard time keeping his hands off women. And Lenin said, talking about this just divides us.
Yeah.
If that sounds familiar to anyone.
Very much so. It's a
this is a problem.
Although I think the new phrase is...
It's a recurring theme on the left, just like the left tearing themselves to shred, which just keeps.
Well, I mean, there's been one of the reasons for various splits in the Trotskyist movement has been over people being outed as abusers, and then organizations arguing about whether that person really was an abuser. That was the fundamental premise for the split between the previous British Trotskyist party that led to the original creation of the British SEP.
It's Trotsky. You can't get bowled over by this cultural problem, man. We got to be class only. Class only. Just because he's a rapist doesn't mean that he's not a class warrior. Which is a really bad.
It's a really bad position that has harmed the Communist Party of Canada, the PSL's predecessor party, Workers' World in the U.S., the SEP in England and Australia and the U.S.
And it's made me a lot of enemies in the WSW and here in America.
I bet.
They do not like it when you point out that fact.
No, but that's interesting because that kind of but those on the left or left leaning. Let's not beat around the bush. The Jimmy Dores of the world, Max Blumenthal, Chris Hedges, and other similar folk. These are the ones who say, let's not talk too much about transphobia. Enough talking about institutional racism, institutional sexism, and institutional queerphobia. We do need to find common cause with some of these idlibs, idiot libertarians, and make alliances with them.
And then just to the right of them, waiting in the wings, are your Caleb Mopans, your Communist Party of Great Britain Marxist-Leninist.
But do we have to make nice with them? I mean,
but that's the whole thing. Those guys to the right are the actual right-wingers cosplaying as left-wingers and calling themselves patriotic socialists.
I mean, those are the guys like Jackson Hinkle.
In the U.S., he's a big one now.
I mean, that are always showing up with these, radically bizarre positions.
George Galloway in the UK.
Who when he goes on that on the British version of Fox News with English accents, GB News, proudly claims that he's no longer identifies with the left because he's tired of wokeism and he's tired of people defending Men
little
who want to
things.
wear dresses and harass little girls, all that transphobic tropes and so forth. But to answer your question directly, Connor, that's exactly why there is a lot of, once again, huge fights and divisions going on with
I
the
want
left
to swing back
because the Jimmy Dores of the world, the
Yeah.
Max Blumenthal's of the world wanted so badly to have this rage against the war machine with all of their libertarian friends and the Oath Keepers, and Black Alliance for Peace and many other groups says, sorry, I have to draw the line somewhere.
And then I want to swing back around, and I want to swing back to the word Jacobin and Jacobin magazine,
Let's do it.
and groups in both the UK Labour Party, the NDP in Canada, and the Democratic Party in the US, some of whom were mentioned in Connor's article, who show their Jacobin and bourgeois roots when they turn around and attack not just Jimmy Dore or George Galloway,
But they never seem
but
to attack
large movements on their left for being associated at some time with something Jimmy Dore or George Galloway said, and then attempt to justify their support for your Bill Clintons and Joe Bidens and Keir Starmers and Justin Trudeau's by saying, oh, but look, Jimmy Dore and George Galloway are starting up with these horrible right-wingers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I find so fascinating about Jacobin magazine, and it always seems around the holiday season, they always give you like at least 2 or 3 really good articles about some kind of right-wing conspiracy that's, in media. And it's always by that putz, Dr. Ben Burgess, who I think is got to be one of the worst philosophy professors around. He's just got to be.
Also not a big fan of anything associated with the People's Policy Project.
Yes,
or Matt Bruenig.
Bruenig is another fraud, I think, too. But it always seems that they get these articles, and they're always like, we want. It's not that we want, equal outcomes. We want equality of power. And then how do you get equality of power if you don't have an equal outcome? I mean, is anyone going to go to the workplace and be like, well, I want to be the CEO, but I only want to make 20% less than this guy, and he's the lowest paid. I mean, no. I mean,
but Connor, what's so great about your article is it's hilarious that when you watch an outlet like Democracy Now,
oh yeah,
the Young Turks, Nation Magazine, and so forth, and you did a very good job calling them out, Jacobin, Current Affairs, and so forth. They talk an awful lot of crap about how they want workers' rights, how they want workers' revolution, how they want all of the stuff that Bernie Sanders talks about, all the stuff that Canada supposedly has, all the stuff that the Nordic countries apparently have, and so forth.
But they're killing on themselves every time.
And yet, when it comes to their own workers, you have to do an unpaid internship or an internship which pays less than somebody at fucking McDonald's. And when their own unions start to mobilize, then all of a sudden they turn into fucking Walt Disney or some other union bus.
What did Lenin say about social democrats, by whom he mostly meant the social democrats who would go on in Germany, who would go on to kill Rosa Luxemburg, though she was still alive when he said what he said, and the Labour Party in the UK, when he said that social democrats ultimately want socialism without the working class.
Mm-hmm.
They want this socialist system for the bourgeois, where the bourgeois can have all the same privileges as the wealthy, and all the grunt work can be outsourced to the colonies.
Right. And that is definitely a huge part. I mean, and we don't see it enough.
Because when we talk about Scandinavian socialism,
Yeah, it's outsourced.
What we're really talking about is the outsourcing of the bullshit work that would normally be done by the working class to the colonies, and the provision of a quote-unquote middle-class lifestyle for all. Now, we can argue about how well they actually deliver on that.
They certainly don't deliver it to the Sami people or the indigenous Greenlanders.
Well, now that's all part of this whole colonial situation that we're discussing about. The Scandinavian nations are the original settler colonials. That's why we talk about the Norman conquest. What is Normandy? What is Normandy but a settler colony of Vikings in France?
But Chris, you started the show talking about how while welfare is a good idea, to a degree, even a noble idea, the way it was spearheaded by liberals who are the original
make them suffer for it. If they don't suffer for it, they can't have it. If they refuse to suffer for it, they're criminals. That's liberalism.
So Connor, explain the con that is a non-profit media outlets or even a non-profit industrial complex, because many leftists and leftists.
So which media outlets are we calling non-profit? I want to start there. Which media outlets are we calling non-profit?
Democracy Now.
Democracy Now is part of an NGO, so that's accurate. I believe they are.
They've also been taking a ton of money. They were funded by the Ford Institute.
Yes, all sorts of questionable private charities. Also by the NED, which is why some people have called Amy Goodman a CIA agent in not very kind terms. Now, I think for all its problems, Democracy Now! Is still worth watching because it talks about a lot of things you will never hear about otherwise. But at the same time, it's still preventing people from becoming really radicalized.
I think that's the big.
Well, the Nation magazine is a Nation magazine. Mother Jones, which is even more rabidly right-wing than Nation magazine. Are they both considered like nonprofits as well?
So the Nation, that's a good question. When the Nation was founded, the Nation was a socialist project. It was a co-op.
Mm-hmm.
But co-ops are not nonprofit. Co-ops just mean that the profits are shared by the workers. I don't know Nation's current.
Neither do I know Nation's.
Which would be worth finding out. But I wouldn't assume they were nonprofit without looking up their NGO status first. I will say that originally they were intended as a socialist publication. That most of the original founders of the Nation were people who had left the Communist Party of the United States and had previously worked for the Daily Worker. But they were also leaving the Communist Party for unpleasant Cold War reasons. They were kind of red baiters.
Exactly.
The original literary editor of the Nation was Matt Iglesias' paternal grandmother, since we're talking about awful liberals, too.
Mm-hmm. But that, in a nutshell, is liberalism. I mean, if you listen to the very timely protest song of Phil Ush, and you can always remix it and so forth, but that is, in a nutshell, his song, Love Me, I'm a Liberal, is always like, yeah, I believe in civil rights, just not
technically the current
affairs.
Yes,
I believe in a United Nations, but I'm going to support every single imperial war. Yes, I believe in busing and integration, but not in my backyard. I mean, that is...
Now, current affairs is specifically for profit.
No, it's a 501c.
Is it a 501c now?
I just looked it up.
When did it become a 501c?
Okay.
I don't know. It's a 501c.
They were talking about a co-op model, and a co-op model would preclude Any
yes,
sort of 501c organization. In a 501c organization, the treasurer is the dictator in the end because they spend all the money.
it's a 501c3.
Interesting.
Is in these times also supposed to be like nonprofit or just
Now
like
that I would believe that in this times I would believe is nonprofit.
Okay, so you're an independent media outlet, which is you're solely dependent on your readers, but you accept wealthy donors. Why the hell not? So,
Well, I don't know.
in other words, but in other words, it's just another form of, isn't it? Just like another form of corporate media, but just,
sure it is. Sure.
I mean, so the number one. So I did a deep dive. This is obsolete information from the 2020 election now, but I did a deep dive on the Daily Forward's ownership some years back and where their money comes from. The Daily Forward
publication.
The Daily Forward is on paper a sort of nonprofit corporation in the sense that there's no one who is growing their wealth from it in an investment sort of capacity, but all the money, all the leading donors for the Daily Forward, they don't call themselves the Jewish Daily Forward anymore. I'm sorry, that's a historical term.
Yeah, Forward. Yeah, Forward.
All the donors, all the top donors to the Daily Forward are trust funds for rich people. So not even charitable foundations, but trust funds whose job is to manage rich people's wealth, donate to organizations like the Forward or the Nation as a tax deduction. And for the rich people who are the beneficiaries of the trust fund.
Now, when Air America was briefly on the air, and when TYT formed, was TYT always basically like a private company?
The Daily Forward was formed from a charitable endowment from a rich person's will. So it itself is a charitable endowment, which is not a nonprofit, despite being a charitable endowment. Their purpose is to grow the funding of the original estate that was left to it, but it is also supposed to be spent on the business of publishing the Daily Forward.
Oh, that's basically like the Guardian newspaper,
yes.
Corporate magazine in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So it does accept. It is sponsored by
it's openly. I mean, again, all of the leading donors.
But
as of 2019, because in 2020 I was using 2019 financial numbers. As of 2019, the majority of the top donors to the top single donor organizations to the Daily Forward were all trust funds for rich people's heirs.
And the Intercept was basically Pierre Omidyar's.
Except Omidyar also started his own Omidyar network because he didn't think he had enough control over the Intercept.
Let's be honest.
Glenn Greenwald, by the way, was fine with all sorts of censorship, conflicts of interest until they were told that he couldn't.
Glenn Greenwald is historically fine with anything until the publication that publishes him says they also want to edit him, at which point Glenn Greenwald pitches a fit. Because
he's always actually, and he always actually has been more. I mean, I hate that term that Noam Chomsky came up with, libertarian socialist. Glenn Greenwald has always been more libertarian than socialist.
Glenn Greenwald has always been a straight up right-wing libertarian. When he was a quote-unquote civil rights lawyer, all of his civil rights cases were on behalf of the free speech of racist organizations for the most part.
I got to say this.
Was he actually part of the ACLU or a separate like libertarian constitutional free
Well, he was a quote unquote civil rights lawyer, which means he had a practice where he represented people in civil rights law, which means discrimination cases that are ultimately going to the Supreme Court. But the dirty secret is that the people who represent the bigots are also practicing civil rights law.
And then, but then also, so Connor, so when okay, so before we actually talk about TYT, we should talk about TYT. But when Air America was briefly on the air, did they also accept corporations or money from big wealthy
Sure,
donors?
they were set up by a big donor to the Democratic Party. That was
TYT is a for-profit corporation that openly solicited venture capital. You have to understand, they were shopping for VCs. They got a big fat check from Jeffrey Katzenberg.
Whoa. Let's go back even further. So even earlier than that. So Jeffrey Katzenberg is
they were always built on a venture capital for-profit model, private
before
investment.
that, right? So when they're getting really big, this is like 2008, 2014. Cenk meets Romer, right? The former governor of Louisiana. And they do a big deal because Buddy's now got a big venture capital company that he's operating. They got $4 million in 2014 that they never really talked about because Romer thought that they were going to be the new it thing in media. So, I mean, they've had a really checkered past with where the money comes from. I mean, obviously, Ben Mankiewicz is huge in Hollywood. His brother is used to work for Dateline. His uncle is huge in the motion picture. You know, I mean, he's got two uncles that one grand uncle wrote the movie. What was it? It was Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. That's really one of his grand uncles wrote that, or grandfather. I mean, that's why he's on TCM, is because he's literally royalty in Hollywood. I mean, this guy is old world Hollywood.
But can you also talk a bit more about Cenk's socioeconomic background when his family immigrated to Turkey? Because Turkish immigration is a three-tier system. Well, there are the working class Turkish diaspora that you'll find in Germany, you'll find in Belgium where I live, and so forth. But very, very like reactionary.
Do the Turkish Germans have citizen rights yet?
Yes.
Depends.
Well,
I know that the Armenian diaspora in Germany did not have citizen rights when I was a boxing writer. That's why I was asking.
No. But here's the thing. There are three kinds of Turkish immigrants. Yep. Those who are very, very left wing on top of a working class background are
yes. A lot of the. That's one of the reasons I was asking.
The dominant ones is basically right-wing working class folks who are very socially conservative, and then the super affluent wealthy who are socially liberal, but they love the free markets and they like their cut from big government. So I'm wondering, is Cenk from that kind of second tier background?
Cenk is a rich corporate lawyer who wanted to become a YouTube creator.
I don't know if he was a rich corporate lawyer.
Well, he was a corporate lawyer from a well-to-do family background. Let's put it that way.
That's more accurate. I would say that he was the number 2 on your choice, Yuri. From what he's let leak out over the years, his family definitely had a lot of money. He was definitely. I mean, this is a guy that went to Columbia and Wharton.
Yeah, he's a Wharton guy like Trump. He went to the same school as Trump. And now let's talk about this. The reason people go to Wharton is because they are part of a club.
Oh yeah, you know, it's definitely a stepping stone into corporate America's greater elite. You know, I mean, you're in a different club when you say I went to Wharton Business School than say Joe Schmo Business School from Anaheim. But I mean, so he's definitely well connected, well educated, and part of that upper middle class. And
But you see, this is but you see that's exactly why. Okay, so so I'm the kind of former TYT fan who was always familiar with them but never really got into them. But then when I saw that Cenk, who was very pro-Obama, started to turn on Obama and started attacking him a little bit from the left, that's when I got into him. And then when they supported Bernie Sanders, I was one of those like religious TYT fans who, after watching Democracy Now, you stay up all night to watch TYT and so forth.
Really,
Jimmy Dore, of course, started his career separate channel. They did very good coverage of the both them and Democracy Now did very good coverage of the revolts of the Sandinistas when WikiLeaks exposed what happened. And then I stopped watching TYT the moment they started to, recycle all the bullshit about the Russians interfering in the elections. Then I would watch Jimmy Dore, but then quietly divorce myself from watching Jimmy Dore when he became like an anti-vax, COVID minimalist, denialist extremist, and so forth. And now what's interesting about TYT is this. This is another reason why I watched them for the period of time I did watch them. There was a very favorable documentary that came out about TYT. And that documentary, I think it's called Mad as Hell, completely omits the sexism, the slut shaming, and the body shaming of Britney Spears and whatnot and so forth, which was why when I read your article and I saw some of those clips, I was very much like shocked. And the fact that Cenk even like joked and like said nigger this and like nigger that.
And Anna. Cenk and Anna.
There used to be so many more of those.
All of that's completely omitted in this very favorable documentary. And then there's another documentary that came out of Canada called All Governments Lie, talks about I Have Stone, and the left-ish media outlets that they all prop up in this documentary are the following: Matt Taibbi, Democracy Now, Mother Jones, TYT, and this is
which is hilarious because Matt Taibbi.
No, wait. The ironic thing is this: when that documentary came out, All Governments Lie, which is very favorable to TYT, Democracy Now, Matt Taibbi, Glenn Greenwald, all of those guys in one way, shape, form, or another started to pivot to the fucking right.
All right. Now, this is wrong, but it's worth examining how and why it's wrong, don't you guys think?
I love the name Boner.
Bonner, let's be fair.
I'm sorry. It just reminds me of that character from television. You remember?
Oh, I know Boner on. Yes, I remember on Growing Pains.
Growing Pains, right? Like that was like the dirtiest thing they said on the whole show was the kid's nickname over and over and over again. Of course.
Free market capitalists place control of the means of production in the hands of the people through the people's power to tax and regulate industry at the community level.
That's if you believe in the idea of liberal democracy and FDR when he said that I saved capitalism.
Well, I mean, there's some interesting things there. Like, what is the community level? Is the community level the state?
Yeah, what is yes? I mean, who are the community in that? Because the community in the average rural exurb in the deep south is controlled by local gentry or a corporation that maintains a company town. Right. And people have very little to do with it. And when you say the people's power to tax and regulate industry, you're talking about the power of the government, local or otherwise, to regulate tax and industry per the points of the people who elect them, which is, again, that local gentry. And now we're clear. Good. Local governments.
Well, I mean, I'll tell you this. Well, how many local governments have the ability to tax? I mean, like, if you live in a small town like mine, my town doesn't have any taxes on industry. We could put them there. You're not going to because they're too afraid.
live in Oregon. I live in Oregon. The biggest local tax in Oregon is this right here.
Cigarette tax.
No.
Taxes.
Pot tax. The biggest local tax in Oregon is the pot tax. Now, what is the pot tax? The pot tax is a legal regulation that adds to the price of the product at the point of sale so that the customer pays the tax that is at the point of consumption that is supposed to be on the producer to pay for their right to produce.
I hate taxes like those. It's so ridiculous.
Now, that's a local tax. Local taxes are almost always regressive consumption-based taxes or progressive taxes based on finite property.
Well, I mean, even if you have a local tax, and you could do in most cases, you could do a local tax on production, right?
Local property, what I'm calling local property taxes are usually instituted at the county level rather than the city level. The only city property tax in Oregon where the city government takes its cut directly is the pot tax.
But that doesn't mean
the city makes most of its money on police fines.
Well, but what I'm getting at is that yes, you could, but at the end of the day, the price is going to go up, and the consumer's still going to pay for that. You know, it doesn't really matter.
Sure.
You know, I mean, it doesn't matter. You either put it at the end of it where the consumer is directly paying it, or you put it in the middle. At the end of the day, that corporation is going to raise its prices to offset that tax, no matter where.
There are ways. Well, no, there are ways that the community can prevent them from doing that.
Well,
if you go to England, which is my favorite plutocratic state, there's London. There's London, the capital, in which local government has absolutely no power.
Yeah, it's almost like DC.
No power. The mayor almost has no power. Yep. The local councillors almost have no power. Yet there's the city of London, which is a bankster's wet dream, which gets to run roughshods over anyone. And England, you know that England is a plutocracy. It doesn't even try to even be a fake liberal democracy because the rich just gets to run roughshod over anyone, and the working class and the very small precarious middle class suffer and struggle.
Let's get back to let's stay on our topic here because this is common right-wing arguments.
I know.
And here we go again with this one. This one's important too. These are very common right-wing arguments that you see frequently from people who don't know the difference between liberalism and socialism. Where does the idea that liberal market should be taxed and regulated come from?
Well, I mean, there's some of it in Adam Smith.
But right there. The root idea that liberal markets need to be regulated by the government is right there in Adam Smith's work, which is referred to as, the first capitalist text.
The Wealth of Nations.
Well,
Adam Smith, the father of capitalism.
Everything is a lie.
But
that's his next statement. Did you see it?
That's also why these academics, even the leftish ones at these overpriced colleges, it's always why they have to add neo to everything. So neoliberalism is just an extreme form of capitalism.
So where the neo comes in.
My friend Jay Watts, former central organizer of the Communist Party of Canada, says you cannot have libertarianism because you need the government to protect your private property, and that libertarianism is just an extreme form of liberalism.
And here's libertarianism in a nutshell. Everything is a lie, but it's not the capitalists who are lying to you. Trust me, dude.
But Chris and Hunter and my friend Charles, you gotta give libertarians some credit. Ron Paul really does not like crony capitalism. Libertarians are always complaining about. I
don't have to give Ron Paul credit because he allowed his name to be used on a horrific newsletter written and edited by a white supremacist. So I don't have to give Ron Paul credit for anything.
I'm going to give Ron Paul credit for one thing.
What?
He's got a hell of a scam going with the Ron Paul learning system, where your child, where your child will teach himself after the third grade everything he or she needs. No lie.
That's scary. You're going to make me actually believe Ron Paul is onto something because that's basically what I did.
Well, you probably had parents as teachers. I have teachers for parents. They kind of helped guide it a little.
Oh, okay.
Racism is a form of socialism. I don't know how telling people that they're no good because X group.
Whoa. Time the fuck out. Racism is a form of socialism.
I think Charles Bonner's high on crack.
Well,
I don't even know how.
That's not fair to crackheads. That's really unfair to crackheads. I know some crackheads.
No, I don't know how to respond to that, but just that if you're an Afro-pessimist and if you're an extreme black nationalist like Khalid Mohammed, he once claimed that the following: if you go to a socialist country, you got the white socialist on top and the black socialist on the bottom. If you go to a capitalist country, you got the white capitalist on top and the black capitalist on the bottom. If you go to a so-called Jew country, you got the white Jew on top and the black Jew on the bottom. So
I don't even know what that means.
I guess, like socialists do practice bigotry.
No, I mean this right here.
And heteronormativity, so
I didn't know you could socialize race.
Wonderful people like us three.
Hitler was just following the classical liberal idea that nations have the right to self-determine to wipe out other nations.
He was a big fan of the British Empire. Let's not forget that. And he
just wanted it to be more German.
Exactly, and his whole idea of living space, where you slaughter every single Slavic person, Judeo-Bolshevik, was based on Manifest Destiny.
Yes,
look,
blatantly on American Western expansion. Yes,
Hitler was shocked that the British declared war on him when he endlessly praises the British Empire, and Churchill himself and George Orwell himself.
The British Empire, with the exception of Ireland, which was in their minds a very special case not to be talked about.
Yeah.
The British Empire didn't imperialize Europe.
Well, that was the key.
Fundamental. I mean, the fundamental principle of the British Empire was a free Europe, because a free Europe would be at each other's throats.
Yeah.
Well, what is class if it's not social? What is?
I like this viewer. I think he's really like, yeah. No, it's interesting.
He's making stuff up, and I'm not going to share that. I'm not going to share that stuff on the channel anymore, because now we're getting away from the useful arguments to deconstruct and getting into the crackpotty. I'm making it up as I go along.
Yeah, but isn't that really what we're facing for the next 4 years?
Ultimately, that's what we're facing with Trump. We're facing I'm making it up as I go along. That's a very good point. That's why it's a bad idea for the media to keep centering Trump's arguments the way they do,
Oh yeah.
rather than deconstructing them.
I mean, I don't know how you deconstruct the Hitler socialized race thing. I don't even know what that
You can't deconstruct that. At that point, you have to sort of.
There's always arguments like that. Like Peter Hitchens thinks that just because Nazis mean National Socialism, that Hitler's a left winger. Like that kind of shit that kind of shit bores me, and like it's really like not.
And Thomas Jefferson would believe that all men should be equal. He wrote the Declaration of Independence, but I mean that didn't work out for him either.
Now, I always love mention of the Delphic Oracle.
Yeah, well, that was high. That was one high chick.
The Delphic, the Pythoness famously sat in front of a volcanic vent and inhaled the volcanic fumes and got high on them, and then predicted the future. Except that through most periods of history, someone working for a group whose name I can't remember, it was the something league, but there was a league of Greek city-states that was responsible for maintaining the Greek religion, and they controlled a period, a area of territory that included Delphi and Olympia and several other sacred sites. The Amphitonic League. That's what I was trying to remember. The Amphitonic League. Now, this was specifically a religious fraternity, but it was also a political organization intended to be controlled at various times by either the Spartans or the Athenians or the Macedonians. And throughout the whole history of the classical period, at least, and the Hellenistic period after, through most of the important periods of time, if someone was going to ask the Pythoness something really important, somebody from the Amphitonic League was sitting behind the Pythoness telling her what to say.
Trying to guide her, let's say. High people are so hard to get the right answers out of. No, you don't want to say that.
Whenever possible, they gave really cryptic answers that could be interpreted multiple ways. But for really important questions with political consequences, somebody from the league was sitting there saying, here's what you say.
Shake that magic 8-ball. It's a no.
Yeah, pretty much.
But the constant conflation.
But Greece, the Greek city-states, fought in the form of the Amphitonic League, fought three, what they called the Sacred Wars and the Social War, which were all about political control of the Greek religion.
Yeah, well, if you take Plato, honestly,
and ultimately,
you need that religion.
It was Macedonian control of the Greek religious fraternity that allowed the Macedonians to become the imperial overlords of Greece.
Funny. And Plato was Plato, who's often like praised if you learn about like ancient Greece.
Plato was a lickspittle for Sparta.
Oh,
that's no thing. Plato was an Athenian lickspittle for Sparta.
Very much so.
I mean, you really have to understand that in the context of the politics where Plato was writing, and his image of a philosopher king is very much based on the Spartan model of kingship.
You know your shit, my friend. I'm very impressed because to our
audience, Aristotle, of course, was in the pay of the Macedonian throne.
Well, he was a Macedonian, so
look. This is what I love about this. This is what I love about this show when I watch it or when I'm invited. Because let me tell you, even if you have the best IB history teacher, your best classical whatever teacher, you're not going to learn any of this like in the best schools you go to, however overpriced or however modest they are. I mean,
No.
A compliment.
I'm very fortunate in that my school's history book had a paragraph about the brothers Gracchi.
But the constant
I like being a
conflation.
nerd.
But the constant conflation of liberalism with socialism, or at least social democrats who think that you can regulate the unjust free market and so forth.
Now this is worth elevating because this is worth deconstructing again. This comes close to being right in a way, but it doesn't. But it misses a lot of actual fact in a material sense.
That's interesting. But again, this is where language completely fools people, because most people, when they think of liberalism, they think of somebody that wants to protect a black person's right to vote, a gay person's right to marry, and so forth. But liberalism is capitalism.
Well, it's in the word.
And the individual, this idea of an individual, we're not talking about.
We're
not talking about an individual like, oh, this guy has a very unique personality and he's very good in science. We're not talking about that kind of individualism. We're talking about
ultimately
having the right to run roughshods over people.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. When we're talking about the sovereignty of the individual, Plato supported the sovereignty of the individual. He called it. No, I'll take it back. Not Plato.
Ayn Rand.
De Maistre supported the sovereignty of the individual. He called it the divine right of kings.
Well, I mean, first of all, what is the sovereignty of an individual exactly? I mean, does that mean I have the right to, go?
Well, the sovereignty. Let's go with the word sovereignty. What does sovereign mean?
Does that mean I have the right to go over to your house and steal all your stuff out of it because I'm a sovereign individual?
Who are you? Well, that's the thing. Who are you sovereign over?
I have the control.
Because let's talk about what sovereignty means. What is a sovereign? A sovereign is someone with power over a community. Now, when we talk about sovereign as an independence, we're talking about independence based on a sovereign's power to protect that independence.
Uh-huh.
And that's that's ideally. Well, I think to a degree, in practice, that is why.
Who wrote natural law? Who writes natural law? Who passes natural law? How is natural law ratified?
Usually by either one individual who just one day arbitrarily says, well, this is the natural law because I have enough power to make it so, or it's a group.
Well, I mean, natural law is somebody's opinion of what they think is right. Well, Thomas Hobbes said natural law is might makes right.
Right.
Now, that's the basis of all liberalism, whether you're for or against Hobbes's solutions. The liberal accepts Hobbes' basic principle that natural law is might makes right, and that people have to enter into agreements to find any sort of other way of living with each other other than might makes right.
Interesting.
Now, if we're saying natural law is anything other than might makes right, we are undercutting the very opinions of classical liberalism and the very justification for the social contract. And we're saying a state of nature is good. Everyone should be in a state of nature where we follow natural law.
Interesting.
Well, I think you can take that. I mean, what is the state of nature? Obviously, that's one of those big gray areas that philosophers have been kind of
Well, but
dubbing over for years.
In liberal theory, the state of nature is what precedes the social contract. The mythical period when, as the biblical authors say in the book of Judges, there was no king in Israel and everyone did what was right in his own eyes.
That's right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's, Nozick has a very specific vision of it, and Rawls has his state of nature, right, where things are distributed and then we work out from there, and Locke has his where everything is in kind of chaos until people start, actually using that private property.
Ultimately, Locke's state of nature, Locke's state of nature is completely drawn from Hobbes. Rousseau's state of nature is completely drawn from Hobbes. All of classical liberalism is based on the fundamental idea that natural law is might makes right, and that people have to make a voluntary agreement. However, anytime people make a voluntary agreement to regulate whether or not might makes right, the strongest people say, you're squelching my individual liberty.
Well, I mean, but that is what Hobbes writes, right? I mean, that's the whole point of the Leviathan, is that the state has to be stronger than the individual right to say, I have the right to use power in these ways.
And Locke makes a whole different argument opposite to Hobbes. And this is why in the end fascism and liberalism are always the same.
Hobbes argues that we can agree on something, and we don't have to give up that, notion that we don't have to, Hobbes says, no, the state has to beat them into submission.
Yes.
Whereas Locke is like, no, we'll come together, we'll build a town, we'll get a bunch of guys together in a room, and we'll make a nice vote on it.
and this is why
what he doesn't realize is that, the vote is all by the guys with all the power in town, and they're going to all vote for themselves to have the most power.
Let's remember that in the end, the government that appointed Locke to the Bank of England was put in power at the barrel of a gun when a conspiracy of military officers in King James's army defected to President Your Majesty.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And we call that the Glorious Revolution and pretend no one died, when in actuality there was quite a bit of fighting.
But now,
small casualties on a low level and not big battles, but still quite a bit of fighting before William took power. And there was a huge war in Ireland afterwards that lasted for years.
But all countries, even the ones that call themselves socialist, revolutionary socialist, and so forth, with the globalized free market economy, that is the world economy, is there a written law or is it an unwritten law that all businesses must make profits and so forth? So as long as that continues, we're always going to have these deficiencies even in
this is the difference between liberalism and neoliberalism. And this is where the neo comes in. Liberalism is the idea that that ultimately everything is based on an idea of fairness. Now, whose idea of fairness is open to a debate? But the point is that liberals are trying to be fair to someone while also protecting the status quo. That's really the main difference between Locke and Hobbes in the end. Locke is trying to find a fair way to do what Hobbes is talking about.
Aristotle was not impressed with any system, but he did believe if you want social harmony, you gotta make sure that there's no huge gap between the super rich and the super poor and so forth. But just because you have a middle class does not mean that everybody hunky-dory because you still have many haves and have-nots.
And again, the whole welfare state, despite being brought about by utilitarians based on who are operating on a essentially Epicurean idea that happiness is the good, and we want as many people to be happy as possible. This as many people to be happy as possible was built on the misery of non-people. Yep. The people who were excluded from the liberal democracy of the middle class. This is why you get the idea that the poor have to suffer to get help from the state.
Well, there's a lot of issues with that's also part of the Calvinist approach. They didn't believe that you should have.
Okay, so now we're getting into Ayn Rand.
Ayn Rand's altruism
objective according to whose viewpoint? I mean, that's the real objective according to whose opinion?
Well, I mean, if it's the truth, right, it's supposed to be independently verified by the facts and reality, right?
In theory, but Ayn Rand's objectivism does not actually lend itself to scientific criticism and is non-falsifiable.
Well, my man John Pilger, one of the great truth tellers and mythbusters, always said that the truth is always subversive, which is actually the motto of my friends at Orinoco Tribune.
Now, this is a very Marxist thing to say.
That's indeed.
This is a very Marxist thing to say. Both Marx and Bakunin can be quoted as saying that freedom is understanding the rules in which we operate.
Mm-hmm. But what I was getting back to is with objective truth. I mean, obviously, there's a whole science of epistemology, if you want to call it a science. I mean, it's what I studied.
A metaphysic, to use Marx's term, I am amused by how much of Marx's own metaphysics he is blind to. But that's another topic for another argument.
But I don't know where this guy's going. I mean, I think he's just having some fun.
Well, natural law as a science is, like I said, a very Marxist thing to say. That's something that both Marx and Bakunin would have said straight out. And that the scientific socialism was finding the balance in which everyone would flourish and society would best produce abundance.
Yes. Well, I guess his Marx advocated for enslavement of blacks. Apparently, he didn't read that chapter when he sent all those letters off to Abraham Lincoln.
Well, America's capitalism on steroids has corporations seen as
Marx's biggest disappointment.
So if you want to talk about individualism, the rights of individualism, I can tell you, talking to Republicans, they have a very different idea of what a person is.
Well, Marx,
and that's a corporation.
Marx believes.
Whereas the bleeding hearts liberals and the Bernie Sanders of the world, they think of people as like someone who's bourgeoisie and working class.
Marx believed that the American Civil War was a second American revolution of the bourgeoisie against the traditional landholding American rural ruling class, as expressed by Jefferson and Washington and Madison as individuals and the social class that they came from, despite the differing politics of Washington and Jefferson. But Harry Haywood would later go on to say, the great author of Black Bolshevik, Harry Haywood would go on to say that the great failure of the American Civil War was that the bourgeois democratic revolution was not completed with the liquidation of the slaveholding class.
Neo-slavery.
Well, Harry Haywood.
Before we have the new Jim Crow, which is
that's right.
Harry Haywood said in the age of the original Jim Crow, the 1930s, that the bourgeois democratic revolution, in the form of the struggle for black democratic equality in the American system, had to precede the socialist struggle, because until that happened, the working class could not come together in solidarity. This is the underlying theory for Stalin's popular front. A black guy said a very good and serious thing about the United States that was turned into some white bullshit.
That's fascinating in and of itself.
Because the popular front was the idea that we have to finish this bourgeois democratic revolution everywhere before we can have a socialist revolution. Exactly. And that therefore liberals are the necessary precursors of socialism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is where you get to the American Communist Party's contemporary argument that when all the Republicans are gone and Democrats run everything, then Americans will see that Democrats are the enemy.
Well, I think
that's an interesting theory. That's an interesting theory.
That's the whole underlying praxis of the Communist Party US, and to a lesser extent DSA. The idea that you have to have the Democrats control the entire government with no Republican participation before the American working class socialist will see that the liberal is really their enemy. And only then will they overthrow the liberal.
That being said, it wouldn't be so bad if the neo-Confederate Republican Party was put in the dustbin of history, or the Conservative Party of Britain, the Liberal National Party of Australia, or
the whole premise originally of congressional reconstruction was the Marxist idea. And I say Marxist because Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, the leading lights of congressional reconstruction, were, like Lincoln, pen pals with Karl Marx. What the point was, the destruction of the Southern ruling class and its replacement with an integrated bourgeois middle class.
But all that being said, I think this is where I kind of agree with the Communist Party USA.
Oh, Lincoln was a Nazi.
Is ultimately,
and I thought he was just a vampire hunter.
Well, Lincoln was a Nazi from the Native American point of view.
Oh,
sure, but I'm just saying. I'm just reading what this guy wrote down here.
Oh, I know.
I just think that. Oh my God.
But ultimately, we come full circle and say we come full circle and say that this free market, whatever you want to call it, is some serious bullshit. And you can get rid of the Republicans, you can get rid of the Tories, you can get rid of the Liberal Party of Australia and their coalition partners, the National Party, or the National Party of New Zealand. We still have to fight enemies, because ultimately the Liberal Party of Canada, the Democrats, Labour in Australia, Labour in Britain, the SPZ, our rival plutocrats, oligarchs, imperialists, racists, whatever you want to call it. So we need a whole revolution and eradicate all of them and their ideology and put that in the dustbin of history.
And even those great social democratic Scandinavian countries have outsourced the working class to the colonies and are supporting everybody off of their national oil companies' teeth.
Well, if you're a member of NATO and the European Union, even though I'm not entirely, a smash the European Union because it's a neoliberal institution, but ultimately you are a social imperialist and you are signing up to pan-European imperialism.
Yes.
When you are a member of NATO, that's good for your arms. That's good for your arms companies. That's good for the businesses who are going to suck up Libya. It's good for Syria when it's a complete batshit, and trade with Israel. Keep your Sami people in line over here. Exclude your Roma people over there. Make sure that certain working class people and then certain working class immigrants never ever go a bit too high, And so, yeah. Call me far left. Call me far left or whatnot. But this system of capitalism just does not work.
Well,
if it does work, obviously it works for the rich. No matter how rich you are, no matter what faction, if you're for the nouveau rich or the old aristocracy, the plutocrats, Zuckerfuck, Elon Musk, Donald Dump, you name it.
The NATO, I'd say, is biggest problem is that it was just a cartel for American arms after World War II. I mean, that was the big.
Also that it was specifically used to keep Nazism alive by giving top former Nazis in the American establishment important military positions in NATO,
and also to make sure that Social Democrats never ever became too revolutionary, which was why they had to kill Olaf Palme, which was why they had to oust Willy Brandt, why they had to oust Gough Whitlam in a constitutional coup,
yep.
And which is why if you're even,
and why even Harold Lord Wilson was labeled a Russian spy,
or why John Diefenbaker had to be pushed aside, and in comes Lester Pearson, who is definitely a liberal because he loves war and he likes, an order for capitalism, and will only make concessions if it keeps the working class just in line. Which is why in Canada you have single payer, but you don't. But dental care and mental care is not part of it, and there's no free pharmaceuticals. It's
dental care and mental care were considered luxuries for the wealthy that should be paid for.
But
poor people didn't need functioning brains and teeth.
But that being said, going forward,
he must have read that.
Why are we having so many right-wingers in our audience today?
Why do you
That's a good question.
Well, why do you think we're having so many right-wingers? All these algorithms are designed to feed more right-wingers in. I mean, my entire feed half the time is Fox News on Yahoo when I open up my email.
But no, I think it's because this is the Steven Pinker. This is almost directly lifted from Steven Pinker.
Well, yeah, it's probably some right-wing bot.
Probably. We're getting,
because I follow Canadian news and so forth for 1+1, I have my settings on Microsoft to give me Canadian news, and the only liberal-ish news I get is the CBC. The rest is an avalanche of the fucking National Post, Canada's version of the Daily Mail and the New York Post.
What I find most deeply hilarious about the Steven Pinker quote is that this essentially is saying that Dengism is the ideal form of liberal capitalism, because those numbers that they're talking about where capitalism has lifted people out of poverty, They're talking about communist China since Deng.
I was just about to say they're kind of distorted. They're kind of distorted views of.
They're endorsing Dengist state capitalism for socialist purposes as the ideal form of capitalism when they say this. No, I'm not a Dengist. I have complaints against China, both Maoist complaints against Dengism and anarchist complaints about Maoism.
Yeah.
But all that said, I think it is hilarious that the Steven Pinker quote relies on hiding behind Dengism to defend capitalism and take credit for capital and to give capitalism credit for Dengism.
Actually, I have to ask and digress a question to Connor.
Sure.
So, Ben Burgess, why are you not a fan of Ben Burgess, and why do you suggest I not get too deep into him? Funny enough, I've actually talked to him once. He was a frequent guest on The Barricade, which is a left-leaning pan-Eastern European publication, and he was one of their first early guests. This is
those European NATO those European pro-NATO leftists that keep showing up at DSA meetings to say why we should support Ukraine.
The Barricade's anti-NATO. No, the Barricade's publication is anti-NATO.
Okay. I'll tell you.
Branko Milanovic is anti-NATO, but I mean at the same time he's kind of not. So it's all very
Well, I mean, if you want to be anti-NATO, not anti-NATO, I'm not really concerned about that. My issue with Ben Burgess.
Ben Burgess, I talked to him once.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that Eastern Europe should definitely approach politics the kind of Bernie Sanders way to galvanize the working class. But anyways, you're not a fan of him.
Where does my grievance come from? Well, my grievance comes from a very simple thing.
The article we're talking about actually explains it really well.
Part of it is that he never sticks up for leftist writers or workers in these magazines. Every time there's been a major issue, like for the Tribune, right? In 2018, Mike Elk of Payday Report says, Bhaskar Sankara is not going to pay his workers, and the workers are sending out all these messages like, we were promised 70% back pay. Bhaskar said he's going to do it. Now all of a sudden he reneges. Where's Ben? Ben's always whining about democracy in the workplace, and as soon as it happens, he's like, "Oh, don't look at me."
Hey, Ben Burgess is still buddy.
And then current affairs.
Nathan Robinson loves the idea of democracy in the corporate workplace, but not in the current affairs workplace.
Right. I mean, again, so like a year later, he's writing articles again for current affairs, talking about workplace democracy. I'm like, wait a minute, you just had a case for this, and instead of coming out and writing a good article about like why these people deserve to have the worker co-op they were promised by Nathan J. Robinson, or Willy Wonka, as I like to call him, for that lovely green velvet outfit. I mean, I don't know where you get that outfit other than a thrift store.
He's British.
I don't know where you get a velvet outfit in 2000.
He's a white Englishman who went to Harvard.
Exactly. Yeah. Or Cambridge. Or
Oxford. No, he went to Harvard. He specifically went to Harvard.
Harvard and
I am a big reader. I used to be a big reader of Nathan Robinson. I discovered Nathan Robinson when Obama was president because he was one of the few people who actually had an anti-PETA campaign going. Nathan Robinson is a genuine animal lover who is a vegan and animal rights supporter for what I would call genuinely good reasons, who has problems with PETA's Nazism and their extermination of specific species of animals because they're not natural.
Yeah, well,
so I mean, and so I always liked Nathan Robinson up to a point, but there's always been limits. to
I mean,
his.
you know it's incredible.
But
you know
again,
but you know what's incredible about all these people and even noble movements like the animal rights movement is they all, I think, due to the system, call it capitalism, call it whatever you want it is, call it the propaganda system, call it whatever you want it is. They all find themselves polluted with right-wing baggage.
Sure, but so then we get to TYT, Turks, right? Young Turks. They're fighting, right? He's best friends with Michael Brooks at the time, Ben Burgess, right? He's going on the show all the time. They're part of the network, so they can't possibly say anything. And again, I mean, he's just used every of those outlets as stepping stones to create his own wealth. And it's always at the expense of his fellow workers who, I mean, I think that if you're going to say you're a socialist, you might actually want to have a little solidarity. I may be crazy on that one. But I mean, if you're going to say, well, we can't have democracy in the workplace.
There was
small magazines, but we can have it at Time.
There was a depressing tendency of a lot of progressive people to try to sort of find excuses for Cenk Uyghur because the IATSE is only going after TYT because they're trying to help this candidate in Cenk's district get elected, and Cenk is running against her. And it's like, okay, yes, the IATSE endorsed that candidate for the reason they always endorse the establishment Democratic candidate. But to say that Cenk Uyghur's employees don't deserve rights in the workplace because he's running against somebody that a union has endorsed is pretty stupid.
Oh, but it's more than just that. I mean, these guys never even talk about it. And then finally, when I asked him in person on Twitter, he blocks me. He literally blocked me. And I was like, okay, that's it. Gloves are off, buddy. I'm going to find everything I can.
Do you know why Anna Kasparian blocked me? It's a tremendously petty reason. So during the 2020 election, there was a period during which people in a certain niche of the podcast sphere, your Humanist Reports, your Rational National, David Dole, your David Diane, who at the time was with writing for
The Hill or something, or
for a while it was The Intercept. Before that, he was one of the people at.
He still is.
He was one of the people at David Diane is what is it that he does? The Prospect. David Diane edits The Prospect.
He's still there.
Yeah. Where? Who? What?
David Diane is still at The Prospect.
He edits The Prospect now. Yes. He used to be at The Intercept, and before that, he was one of the people who worked for the progressive news outlet that was run by Cap, and who left to join The Intercept, saying they didn't want to be told what to do by the Democratic Party and Cap anymore.
Maximilian Alvarez blocked me because I told him that we could have socialism now if we actually just did some of the stuff we talked about.
He still follows me, but he doesn't really ever interact.
That was an instant block when I sent that when I told him that.
I find that interesting. It doesn't shock me either.
He was like,
Real News has a lot of good content still, but again, they fall back into the liberalism. They don't want to represent their class interests.
Perfect example of of people fooling themselves that just because they have a non-profit that they're not going to be sucked into all of the things that comes with the system of capitalism. And
in the end.
And the Real News Network, even when Paul Jay was the senior editor there, did a lot of great content, always criticizing Obama from the left. But in the end of the day, when push came to effing shove, Paul Jay got to vote for the Democrats. And if he was in Canada, he actually would even be discouraging fellow leftists from even voting for the NDP. Now, I know the NDP has a lot of problems, but that's much more of a.
You don't.
For the
I mean, let's be honest.
Paul Daly says to people to vote for liberals.
Well, let's be honest. Do you want a liberal government that doesn't need a coalition with the NDP to form a governing majority? Really? I don't. I mean, that's the
Sure
best argument for the NDP with all of its problems in Canada. I don't want a liberal government that doesn't need an NDP majority to govern.
Sure you do.
Well, I also
it's
think
called Weimar, 1933.
I also just think it is so stupid, and I cannot ever entertain the mentality of actual leftists when they engage in tactical voting. It's so stupid. It's so counterproductive. It's so doing your own goal.
You know, there was a whole.
If you hate both liberals and conservatives, then you hold your nose and vote. Well, you can do this. You can hold your nose and vote for the NDP and do that as a protest vote. Or if you do have a communist in your writing, vote vote for the communists. But this whole tactical voting is just stupid, and the liberals keep winning and keep laughing.
Hey, if the Green Party of Canada wasn't run by a total weirdo with no sense of consistency at all,
any kind of ecology,
yeah.
Elizabeth May,
there would be such an opportunity for the Green Party of Canada. I mean,
getting back, what happened to Anna? Yeah. Why did she block you?
Anna blocked me because David Dole and Mike from the Humanist Report and David Diane, who at the time was still with, he had left the other outfit and was with The Intercept. These folks were DMing people who were arguing with Anna and Schenck and criticizing Anna and Schenck for supporting Biden and asking them to please stop criticizing Anna and Schenck. And I outed that David Dole had been doing that for people in a thread, and Anna blocked me.
She blocked me because I kind of pointed out that she didn't recognize Milton Friedman when she was trying to tell somebody else that they should really check their sources. She has this video with Cenk where she's like, some old dude is like totally telling these young people not to like Bernie Sanders. Right, it's a picture of Milton Friedman, and it's like got Milton Friedman written on the bottom of it with his quote. If the government were in charge of the Sahara, they'd be out of sand in a week or something stupid like that. And I circle it, and I have the whole video, and I stick it right up there because I edited it and I shoved it right up there. And within 30 seconds, she blocked me, but it got like 50,000 views, and she was so angry. It was what's her name from? It was the Palestinian reporter from. Rihanna Kelly. How do you say her last name?
She's Lebanese American.
Lebanese. Rania
Khalek. Yes.
Right, and she was knocking her.
Interesting.
She does certain type of reporting, but I think she should check her facts more. I said, you mean like this? And then I shoved that.
I found out something interesting that should be considered in context for the Israeli incursions into Lebanon. It really, really is an amazing coincidence. Mm-hmm. The incoming Lebanese prime minister, as of 2025,
a Western bootlicker.
No, but here's the thing: the incoming Lebanese prime minister in 2025. Do you know what he was doing in 2024?
No, not offhand.
He was the president of the ICC.
Oh, well.
Oh, my God.
You see it now. In 2024, Israel was invading the president of the ICC's country while the ICC was getting ready to start a genocide trial.
By the way, many people have also pointed out that Amal Clooney, the most overrated human rights lawyer,
yes,
bar none, hasn't said fuck all about what Israel is doing to Palestine, hasn't called that Israel should be prosecuted for genocide.
Do you want her husband's movies not to be played in Tel Aviv anymore?
I mean, honestly, with one or two exceptions, most of his movies aren't that great.
Exactly.
I mean,
but they make
the one that's good is not exactly his most famous. The Clooney movie that I think everybody should watch is called Up in the Air.
I didn't like that one
great movie. That's such a great movie. I love that movie.
Up in the Air, George Clooney plays this guy who works for this company that fires people after mergers.
I've seen it.
I
know the movie.
That's the only George Clooney movie that I would miss if they never played a George Clooney movie again.
I kind of like.
Wait. But you gotta like Good Night and Good Luck. That's pretty good. Syriana, Michael Clayton.
I haven't seen Good Night and Good Luck.
Michael Clayton, I don't like that much. I mean, I got to be honest. I like the Coen Brothers. I like Will Brother, Where Art Thou? I think it's funny I think it's great when they're in the car.
I like Kenneth Branagh's movies. That's my idea of a great director, Kenneth Branagh.
No, actually, it's funny. The Coen Brothers bug never bit me. And I've tried watching a lot of their movies, but for some reason I'm just not as like I don't know.
My reaction to Fargo was,
Exactly.
I think we have to agree with R.
No Country for Old Men was also my reaction. It was like, okay.
So here's the thing. Have you read Cormac McCarthy at all?
No. And actually, one of these days, I actually have to quit journalism for like 2-3 years, so I actually can like get back into like reading proper fiction.
No Country for Old Men is based on a novel by Cormac McCarthy.
Yeah.
As was the Viggo Mortensen movie The Road, and the Matthew McConaughey, Ethan Hawke. Ethan Hawke. I can't remember which of the two sort of almost A-listers, but not quite it was, but All the Pretty Horses. That was Cormac McCarthy. Cormac McCarthy's literary work is a lot of, what was that? And so it's kind of No Country for Old Men. I wasn't expecting anything out of because I didn't even try to watch it. Now, that said, the Coen Brothers' masterpiece is their version of True Grit. Everybody should watch the Coen Brothers' version of True Grit, especially if they read the Charles Portis novel and liked it, because the Coen Brothers' True Grit is the book. John Wayne's True Grit is rewritten because the lady who wrote the screenplay thought the ending of the book was bad.
Okay,
and she changed a lot of things to make it very specifically about the relationship between Maddie Ross and Rooster Cogburn. Whereas in the book, it is very much a coming-of-age story about Maddie Ross. And while she does feel personally close to Rooster Cogburn, the book and the Coen Brothers movie ends with her having a freaky sexual fantasy about LaBeef. Sorry.
Actually, and actually, while we are talking a little bit about films, although I cannot say I was a huge fan of his, we do have to say rest in peace to David Lynch. I love The Elephant Man. I love Eraserhead. And love The Straight Story. I've not seen Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire, or Dune, but Chris, you recommended I check those films out.
I recommend.
I'm not going to mention Blue Velvet because that was disgusting, like violent.
I recommend Dune very strongly.
And the original. So if I did not like the Dune that's been coming out,
if you did not like the Dune that's coming out, you should especially watch the David Lynch Dune.
Okay, definitely.
Likewise, if you've seen and didn't care for the Sci-Fi Channel take on Dune, you should watch David Lynch's Dune.
Okay,
There were things I both liked and didn't like about the Sci-Fi Channel's take. I liked Ian McNeice as Baron Harkonnen. That was great. He did a very good job. But the rest of the cast was not particularly exciting.
Wasn't Isabella Rossini in that too?
Isabella Rossellini was in that. The original is so much better. The original has everybody who was good in I, Claudius. I exaggerate a little bit. That's overstating.
Come on, I gotta say I'm a Bob Guccione Caligula fan. I mean, what can you do? That was perfection. Helen Mirren, Malcolm McDowell. Don't come after
Sean Phillips as Livia, though. Sean Phillips as Livia is the best villain in any soap opera.
Speaking of Malcolm McDowell and directors, Stanley Kubrick, by the way, apparently loved Eraserhead.
Yeah,
thought it was a masterpiece and forced like the entire cast of The Shining.
Well, remember Kubrick made the very David Lynch, even though it was before Lynch, made the very David Lynch movie Seconds, which everyone who hasn't seen should see.
I've seen it.
Seconds stars Rock Hudson as a rich person who runs into really, 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 really bad fortune trying to reinvent himself.
Well, funny enough, I was one of those like obsessive like Stanley Kubrick fans, and although he still is he is a pedophile that still hasn't been brought to justice, but I love Roman Polanski's movies, and I really like Roman Polanski's movies, and his movie about the Dreyfus affair is
let's be honest. Be honest. If you're trying to find a political reason to defend someone or a political reason for someone to be persecuted, then you can sort of say, well, the movie about the Dreyfus affair is why WSWS keeps defending Roman Polanski.
I think it's just like knife on the water.
I'll defend the arts, but not the person. Like
but that's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, and I believe I believe that in the debate between auctorial and intent and a deep reading of the text, that ultimately T.S. Eliot is right and Alan Moore is wrong. And that what the reader gets from the work will always matter more than what the author intended to say. Because what the reader gets from the work is what the reader heard the author saying, regardless of what the author intended.
Interesting. I think I kind of get where you're... interesting take.
I mean, if we think of it in terms of murder, the U.S. is pretty much the only country where the intent to kill someone makes a huge difference if someone doesn't get killed. If I don't kill you, then my intent to kill you doesn't particularly matter because I didn't kill you and I did injure you. So my intent doesn't really matter.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because Sam Harris, when he kept emailing like Noam Chomsky and published like the correspondence, kept insisting to Noam Chomsky that America is a force for good in the world. We've done some horrible stuff, but the intentions were always good. And Noam Chomsky's response was, and I'm paraphrasing, "What the fuck are you smoking?
Pretty much,
Have you not read declassified documents? Have you not like?"
Yeah, the idea America's and even then, I mean, what does it matter? I mean, again,
the road to hell is paved with
if you're in a traffic accident where you didn't intend to kill anybody, but you still killed people. I mean, America is one of the few countries in the world that doesn't prosecute that as a crime, regardless of the lack of intent.
But I was thinking about David Lynch and Blue Velvet. I have to say, as I've gotten older, and the more I'm getting older, the more I have a very hard time watching extreme violence, especially if it's if it's directed towards women. I have to say I'm almost kind of embarrassed that I was such a huge like Clockwork Orange fan and would like shove it in people's face and wear like a.
But Clockwork Orange is a very important. It is a very important take, whether you agree with everything in it or not.
Very bleak take on humanity.
It's a very important take on the individual versus society and what it really means to be re-socialized, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it's the idea, right or wrong, the romantic idea that some destructive influences are necessary for society to in any way be progressive or good. There has to be some sort of bad to fight.
Yeah, well, Anthony Burgess was a huge critic of, what do they call that? Damn it. Behaviorism, right? Skinner and B.F. Skinner's behaviorism.
Yes.
Right. And all those ideas that, you could remove certain behaviors through certain other counter behaviors, right?
Yeah.
And how the book ends is totally different than how Stanley Kubrick, because they censored it, right? I mean,
yeah.
In the book.
Kubrick had the British edition and didn't have the American edition. The American edition is where, regardless, is where Alex DeLarge is cured. He goes back to his sociopathic ways. He gets a government job and then grows out of it one day and goes, I don't want to be a serial rapist, the guy who beats up people and uses
he goes home. He has a family, right? And then there's the family. But in the movie, it ends
which I find equally disgusting as okay. He's cured, and yeah, it's awful that we have moral degenerates, but they should still have a choice if they want to be moral degenerates, and that's why the movie has not aged well with me. And then on top of the
but there's another question though, and this is something that always bothers me because the problem. My problem with the Clockwork Orange is always it embraces the idea that if you could make bad people good, it would be wrong. Which is an interesting moral statement to make, but is anti-human in its central assumption.
No, but isn't that again like very extreme libertarianism that you should have the choice to be a degenerate asshole who fucking rapes people?
Well, so the word degenerate, the word degenerate is one that I always do a little when I hear it, because the word degenerate, even though it sometimes seems like it might be accurate, the word degenerate is the language of the enemy. It is a heavily loaded term based entirely on eugenics. And the idea is that the degenerate were the de-evolutionized people who should not be allowed to reproduce. Mm-hmm. So I really hate that word in general.
Yeah, fucking Nazis and eugenics ruined everything.
But the notion of degeneracy and degenerate behavior is this whole notion that there is a natural law to evolution and a moral goal, and that behavior that offends the specific morality of someone else is a grounds for revoking their humanity. Mm-hmm. Now,
but by the way,
people who I believe are actually degenerate in that way are Nazis, and I realize there are contradictions in that position.
But look, that being said, while I'm quite open to the idea of abolishing the police, prisons, and getting rid of punitive punishments, all that being said, prisons, like, okay, look. When somebody like a Jeffrey Dahmer goes to prison, or any of those serial killers, I don't want them to be tortured to death and brutalized while they're in prison, because that doesn't help anybody. In fact, that only makes their condition even worse.
Well, under the principles.
But that being said, A Clockwork Orange, I think that's a pretty bleak message, because it's so they're born evil. Let's be evil.
Under the principles, under the principles of the law of the Lombards, it was illegal for the king to put any citizen to death. But if I killed your brother, then you could come chop my head off. But the king could not chop my head off for killing your brother.
Yeah, well, that created a lot of blood feuds. Yes, it did. And it was those kinds of blood feuds that led to words like feudalism. Well, no, actually, it's the other way around. Feud comes from feudalism, but still. Actually,
that's hilarious, because that scenario kind of reminds me of my hero George Carlin. His very last thing was, and it's bad for you, is look, I believe we either should have unlimited rights or no rights. For example, I believe I have the right to do whatever I please. But if I do something you don't like, I believe you have the right to kill me. So you're not going to find a fairer fucking deal than that. So the next time some jerk-off says, I have the right to my opinion, you go, yeah, and I have the right to my opinion, and my opinion is you have no right to your opinion, then shoot the fuck and walk away.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, that usually ends up with somebody else trying to shoot you.
Hey, exactly. I mean, it worked for Aaron Burr.
It did work for Aaron Burr, right? I mean, they went to Jersey and shot it out, and then, Alexander Hamilton died in Brooklyn.
My favorite fact.
Yeah.
My favorite fact about that gunfight is that Hamilton shot first and might have missed on purpose.
Did he miss on purpose? I don't think so. I am never missing a gun that I've just said that I'm going to go shoot.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing. And it has to do with Hamilton's actual personal history. Hamilton had been involved in 3 prior affairs of honor before the actual duel. And all the other affairs of honor that Hamilton were involved in were resolved amicably by the discussion of seconds and agreeable apologies by both parties without any gunplay.
Yeah, usually those things, most duels didn't actually go to, because no one was crazy.
The general consensus among the witnesses of the duel, who admittedly, even Burr's seconds liked Hamilton better than Burr. Burr was not a popular person, but
that's why Burr shot. That's why Burr shot. If you have no friends, you shoot.
But that said, there was a general consensus among the witnesses of the duel that Alexander Hamilton missed on purpose. And that and one of the premises for the murder charge, despite the duel having taken place in New Jersey, was that Alexander Hamilton was allegedly said to say to his brother-in-law and second John Barker Church that he meant to miss his first shot, and he would only shoot Burr if it came to a second pass.
I got to be honest.
Now, what's interesting is John Barker Church was the husband of Alexander Hamilton's extremely lascivious pen pal. And they were involved in some really hot and heavy letters.
Eek.
And you gotta wonder if Church didn't load Hamilton's pistol light because his sister-in-law was in love with, because his wife was in love with his brother-in-law.
Interesting that we actually have outlawed dueling. And of course,
and that was New
I
York
want to bring it back.
outlawed dueling, and that was why
and
it
of
had to
course-
be in New
and of course,
Jersey.
the
I think
police
we
have to intervene when there's like a turf war or a mob war or a gang violence amongst each other, and yet we still haven't gotten rid of the institution of war, as Lenin says, the highest stage of capitalism, imperialism.
The reason that the U.S. banned dueling is because too many members of the ruling class who could have been useful were killed in duels.
Which is why I bring it back. I bet you they do it again.
The hero of the shores of Tripoli, Stephen Decatur, was killed in a duel. The man who killed him in the duel had his naval career ruined because he killed Stephen Decatur in said duel.
Now, you see, I think we should do it again, right? I mean, think about it. I
When
can see Trump and Musk.
When Commodore Bainbridge, the man who shot Decatur, was up for court martial, the people who were on the court martial were all friends of Decatur.
I say bring back dueling between these rich assholes, but they are allowed to wear like a bulletproof vest. And on that note, I unfortunately have to go.
Zuckerman, I want to see.
And my father says that dinner is ready.
No, this is a good time for us to wrap up. We went for almost 3 hours today.
Zuckerberg and I could see Zuckerberg and Musk doing it. Right? I mean, forget that cage fight.
Dude, imagine Rupert Murdoch against Elon Musk, because Elon Musk move over Rupert Murdoch. Elon Musk is the right-wing asshole that gets to dictate and tells like political parties, you must do as I say. So.
Well, it's and that's hilarious, because when he bought Twitter, he was talking about how he wanted to make the public square a place for free speech.
He did. Free speech that he likes.
Although, look, before I go,
I know we're wrapping up.
Look, before I go, I have to give Twitter compliments where it's due, because this is how you're described when clicking on you on the new like Facebook kind of like AI profile. Chris Richards, aka Eclectic Radical, is a self-described working-class public intellectual who hosts the Eclectic Radical, diving deep into political theory with a focus on critiquing the false dichotomy of American politics and the systemic issues of capitalism and imperialism. Eclectic Radical's been schooling folks on housing market dynamics and the pitfalls of deregulated markets. Eclectic Radical is often tagged in discussions on housing, politics, and social issues with Mafioso, Mac Doubler, engaged in heated debates, while Oak Smith 2018 appreciates their support for educational initiatives in Gaza. And it quotes you, prison should be a crime.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
I like that. That's not bad for AI.
Yeah, it's nuts. And plug to my friend Eve Angler. Eve Angler, a prolific author with 13 books under his belt, a fierce critic of Canadian foreign policy, particularly its support for Israel's actions against Palestinians. He's known for exposing how Canadian charities fund projects in Israel that contravene tax law, and he regularly challenges the mainstream media, and I would say the left-leaning media's narrative on these issues. Eve has been vocal about Canada's foreign policy, questioning its G7 role, critiquing support for Israel's actions in Gaza. Eve Angler is celebrated for confronting powerful figures in Israel-Palestine, with Yuri praising his boldness, and Dimitri Lascaris highlighting his activism. I'm not going to read out mine, but I really do like how they describe me, and I say, thank you, Elon.
That's not so bad. That's not so bad. If I don't mind them using Grok to summarize my page for strangers getting to know me, if that's what they're saying. But that said, I don't like the idea that they're reproducing my shit somewhere.
Let me just say.
I don't know.
Look, my closing thoughts are the following: we got to get rid of this system of capitalism, and no matter how many times they try to reform it, it always leads us back to tyranny. So, fuck the free markets, and let's have a socialist revolution. And when we do have it, don't worry, guys. I don't believe in Stalin's reign of terror. Well,
Could be fun.
Liberalism is ultimately about demanding concessions to the ruling class from the working class, whereas socialism is about aggressively advocating for the interests of the working class at all times. And that's my final thought. What do you have, Connor?
Let's see. My final thought is, well, we're all in for one hell of a ride the next 4 years.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
That's about all I can get right now.
P.S.
No, we are.
P.S. Donald Trump is not your savior. Elon Musk is not Tony Stark from Iron Man. And lefties, I agree with you. Liberals suck. The Democrats suck. But don't minimize how awful Trump is.
If you are a Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, then remember Iron Man 2. Elon Musk is Justin Hammer.
Exactly. Good night, good luck, guys. This is great, and I'll be in touch with you guys on Twitter after I'm done having dinner and going back to chain smoking again. And I am going to go to rehab for cigarette smoking.
Well, you know, like I said, rehab sometimes works if you go on purpose. So have a great week, and everybody, we will tweet at you.
Ciao till then. Thanks,
Ciao.
Chris, for this. Happy